A king doesn't make mistakes. That's what they tell you when you're born into marble halls, where gold drips from chandeliers and power sits heavier than stone. But when King Darius Calthorn walked past every noble daughter in that ballroom and stopped in front of a girl the empire had already thrown away, every rule shattered. One choice, one glance, one hand extended toward someone who had no right to touch royalty. And suddenly, the throne wasn't just a seat of power anymore. It was a declaration of war. This is the story of what happens when an alpha refuses to bow, even when the entire world demands it. Stay till the end, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let's build this tribe together. The palace didn't welcome her. It tolerated her. Alara Voss stood at the edge of the grand hall, back pressed against cold marble, watching silk and jewels swirl past like she was a rock in a river. Nobody looked at her. Nobody needed to. She was the kind of presence people registered once and filed away under irrelevant. Her dress was borrowed. Third hand at least, judging by the frayed hem and the way it hung loose at the shoulders. Someone had tried to make it work with pins and adjustments, but poverty has a smell, and fabric remembers its station. She shouldn't have been there. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks prior, delivered by a palace messenger who couldn't hide his confusion. Alara Voss, human-born, bloodline unlisted, occupation unknown, invited to the King's Ascension Gala as part of the new inclusion initiative. Translation: we need bodies to prove we're progressive. You'll do. She'd almost burned it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you've spent your entire life being invisible. So she'd stitched together dignity from scraps, borrowed a dress from a neighbor who pitied her just enough, and walked into a world that had spent centuries making sure people like her knew exactly where they didn't belong. The ballroom was obscene. Crystal chandeliers the size of carriages hung from vaulted ceilings, painted with scenes of conquest. Every surface gleamed. Every person sparkled. The air itself felt expensive, thick with perfume and ambition, and the particular confidence of those who'd never had to question whether they deserved to breathe it. Alara had learned early how to make herself small, how to stand in a corner and let her presence fold inward until she was practically furniture. The skill had kept her safe in a world that didn't appreciate reminders of its failures. Tonight, she practiced that skill like her life depended on it, because maybe it did. A woman in emerald silk glided past, trailing perfume and contempt. Her eyes skated over Alara like she was staring at a smudge on the wall. The woman's companion, a man with silver threaded through his beard and metals coating his chest, didn't even bother looking. That was the thing about people born to power. They didn't need to acknowledge what they'd already dismissed. Alara's fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. Cheap wine. She could tell by the burn. Even the refreshments had hierarchy. Across the hall, a bell chimed, pure and sharp. The ballroom fell silent in seconds. Every head turned toward the northern entrance, where double doors stretched 20 feet high, carved with the kingdom's crest, a crown wrapped in thorns, sitting atop a bed of swords. Subtle. The doors opened. King Darius Calthorn entered, and the room forgot how to breathe. Alara had seen paintings, tapestries, the official portraits that hung in every government building and marketplace, reminding citizens who held the leash. But portraits lie. They soften. They idealize. The man who walked into that ballroom was violence wrapped in ceremony. Tall, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke to years of combat training, not decorative swordplay. His military jacket was black, severe, cut to emphasize power rather than fashion. No crown. He didn't need one. Authority radiated from him like heat from a forge. His face was hard, all sharp angles and contained brutality. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against tanned skin. His hair was dark, cropped short, militaristic. And his eyes, cold, calculating. The eyes of a man who'd learned early that sentiment was a weakness enemies exploited. He moved through the ballroom like he owned every atom of air inside it, because he did. The crowd parted, not scrambling, that would be beneath them, but flowing smoothly aside like they'd rehearsed the choreography their entire lives. Probably had. Alara's breath caught despite herself. She'd spent her whole life around people who thought they were important, merchants who controlled trade routes, guildmasters who held the keys to employment, minor nobles who lorded their titles over anyone below their station. This was different. This was the real thing. King Darius stopped in the center of the ballroom, His Lord Commander materialized at his right shoulder, a grizzled man with scars that told stories his mouth never would. On his left, the High Chancellor appeared, robed in deep purple, political ambition practically dripping from his smile. The king surveyed his court with the expression of a man inspecting property. Then he spoke. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to command absolute attention. Alara couldn't hear the words from where she stood. Didn't matter. Within seconds, the speech was over and the musicians started up again, a waltz that pulled couples onto the floor and practiced synchronization. The king didn't dance. He walked, slowly, deliberately, past the Lord High Admiral's daughter, with her perfect golden curls and dress cut to display wealth and availability, past the Duchess of Saravan, 40 years old and stunning, power and beauty combined in a package that had toppled kingdoms before, past a line of noble daughters arranged like expensive merchandise, each one flawless, each one desperate. Alara watched with the detached interest of someone observing a world she'd never touch. Then his gaze landed on her. The impact was physical. His eyes locked onto hers across 30 feet of polished marble, and suddenly the noise of the ballroom became distant, muffled, like someone had wrapped the world in cotton. He was looking at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. Alara's heart started doing something complicated and painful in her chest. This was a mistake. She'd been mistaken for someone important, someone who mattered. Any second he'd realize and look away, and she'd go back to being invisible, and everything would return to normal. He started walking toward her. Oh God. The crowd noticed. Of course they noticed. Whispers started up like wind through dead leaves, sharp and cutting. Alara's throat went dry. She looked around for an escape route, but her back was already against the wall, and the king was closing distance with the inevitability of a landslide. 10 feet, 5. He stopped directly in front of her. Up close, he was overwhelming. Taller than she'd estimated. Radiating contained violence and absolute certainty. The scar through his eyebrow was joined by smaller ones, a nick on his jaw, a thin line disappearing into his collar. This was a man who'd earned his crown in blood, not inherited it in ceremony. His eyes were gray, storm gray, and they were looking at her like she was the only person in the room. The silence around them had weight. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, meant only for her. What are you doing hiding in the corner? Not a question, an observation. Alara's brain short-circuited. This wasn't happening. Kings didn't talk to girls like her, didn't see girls like her. This was some kind of political maneuver she didn't understand, and any second it would become clear and humiliating, and she needed to run. But her mouth opened anyway. I'm not hiding, Your Majesty. I'm observing. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one. Observing. Yes. Your court is very educational. The corner of his mouth twitched. In what passes for your world, I imagine it is. It was an insult. Technically. A reminder that she didn't belong here, that her world and his occupied different dimensions of reality. But the way he said it didn't feel like contempt. It felt like acknowledgement. Behind the king, she could see faces. So many faces. Noble daughters with their perfect masks cracking. Council members with calculation replacing their pleasant expressions. The High Chancellor looked like he'd swallowed something toxic. The king extended his hand. Dance with me. Every instinct Alara possessed screamed at her to refuse. To make some excuse, bow, back away, disappear before this moment could metastasize into something worse. But there was something in his eyes. A challenge, maybe. Or a test. Or maybe just curiosity. Her hand moved before her brain caught up. She placed it in his. His grip was firm, calloused, the hands of a warrior, not a ceremonial figurehead. He led her onto the dance floor and the crowd parted like he was carrying a plague victim. The musicians, well trained in reading the room, transitioned seamlessly into a waltz. Alara had never learned to dance. Not properly. She'd watched, sure, everyone had watched, but actually learning required money for instructors and time not spent surviving. I don't know the steps, she whispered. Follow my lead. His hand settled at her waist. Not possessive, not inappropriate. Just there, solid, real. They began to move. Alara stumbled once, caught herself. His grip tightened fractionally, steadying her without making it obvious. Around them, other couples had joined the dance, maintaining the pretense of normalcy, but Alara could feel their stares like knives. Every eye in that ballroom was tracking their movement, measuring, judging, calculating what this meant. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Her voice was barely audible. The king's expression didn't change. "Doing what?" "This. Dancing with someone like me when you could have anyone in this room." His gray eyes studied her face like he was reading a document written in a foreign language. "Perhaps that's exactly why." "That's not an answer." "No, it's not." They turned. Alara's borrowed dress swirled around her legs. The king moved with military precision, each step exactly where it needed to be, guiding her through the pattern like she actually knew what she was doing. "You're uncomfortable," he observed. "Everyone's staring. They're always staring. It's their function, like breathing. That doesn't bother you." Something crossed his face then. Not quite emotion, more like the shadow of something buried deep. "I learned early not to care what they think. You should try it. Easy for you to say. You're the king, which means I'm owned by everyone in this room. Their expectations, their needs, their fear of what happens if I fail to be what they require." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "At least you're free to be yourself." The laugh that escaped Alara was bitter enough to cut. Free. Right. Free to starve. Free to be invisible. Free to know my place. The king's expression shifted. Something calculating entered those gray eyes. "And what is your place?" Alara met his stare, found courage somewhere in the rage that had been building her entire life. "Wherever someone like you decides it is." The music ended. They stopped moving, but he didn't release her hand immediately. The ballroom held its breath. Then the king stepped back, released her, inclined his head in a gesture that was almost respectful. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Voss." He knew her name. How did he know her name? Before she could ask, he turned and walked away. The crowd swallowed him immediately, nobles and advisors closing ranks like water filling a space. Alara stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, heart hammering, skin flushed, very aware that every single person in that ballroom was now looking at her with expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. She'd been noticed. And in a world built on hierarchy and blood and rigid social order, being noticed when you had no right to exist was the most dangerous thing that could happen. Okay. The next 3 days passed in a blur of whispers and stares. Alara went about her life, working her shifts at the textile factory, hauling bundles of raw fabric until her shoulders screamed, keeping her head down and her mouth shut. But word had spread. The factory girls watched her differently now. Not friendly, not curious, wary. Like she'd contracted something contagious. On the third day, Mira cornered her during the lunch break. Mira was the closest thing Alara had to a friend. Loud, brash. The kind of woman who could gut a man with her tongue and had, on multiple occasions. They sat on crates behind the loading dock, eating bread and cheese that tasted like cardboard. "So," Mira said, "danced with the king, did you?" Alara didn't look up. Word travels. Word sprints. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I wasn't," he asked. I couldn't exactly say no. Mira's laugh was sharp. "You absolutely could have said no. You should have said no. Do you have any idea what you've done? Danced. For 3 minutes. You made yourself visible to people who prefer you invisible. That's not survival, Alara. That's suicide." Alara set down her bread, appetite gone. "I didn't choose this." "Doesn't matter. The court sees you now. And trust me, that's not a blessing." Mira's expression softened slightly. "Look, I know you've had a rough go. We all have. But there's surviving and there's getting yourself killed. Dancing with the king puts you in a category those people don't tolerate." "What category?" "Threat." Alara stared at her friend. "I'm nobody. I have nothing. How could I possibly be a threat?" "Because he noticed you. And when a king notices the wrong thing, the court corrects his vision." The words sat heavy in the space between them. Mira stood, brushing crumbs from her work dress. "Just watch yourself. Keep your head down. Let this blow over." She walked back into the factory, leaving Alara alone with thoughts that tasted like ash. But the summons arrived that evening. Alara was in her rented room, a space barely large enough for a cot and a trunk, when someone knocked. Not the landlord's lazy rap. This was official, sharp, commanding. She opened the door to find a palace courier, young, uncomfortable, holding a sealed envelope like it might explode. "Miss Alara Voss?" "Yes." He thrust the envelope at her. "From the palace. You're expected tomorrow evening. Don't be late." Then he was gone, boots echoing down the narrow hallway. Alara closed the door, stared at the envelope. Royal seal, deep red wax. The crown and thorns crest pressed into it with absolute authority. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside, elegant script on heavy paper. "Your presence is requested for dinner at the palace tomorrow evening at 7. A car will collect you at 6:30. Dress is formal. His Majesty King Darius Calethorn." Alara read it 3 times. Then she sat on her cot and tried very hard not to panic. The car arrived exactly at 6:30. Alara had spent the entire day in a state of barely controlled terror. She'd called in sick to the factory, which would cost her wages she couldn't afford to lose. Then she'd torn through her meager possessions trying to find something, anything, that qualified as formal. She ended up in the same borrowed dress from the gala. It was still third-hand, still frayed, but it was all she had. The palace car was obscene. Black, sleek, more expensive than everything Alara had ever owned combined. The driver, an older man with a military bearing, opened the door without comment. She slid inside. The leather seats were soft enough to drown in. The drive took 20 minutes, long enough for Alara's anxiety to cycle through every possible disaster scenario. This was a trap, an elaborate humiliation, a way to put her back in her place in the most public, devastating way possible. Or maybe the king was genuinely interested. That thought was somehow worse. The palace rose against the evening sky like a threat, all marble and gold and architectural dominance. Guards stood at every entrance, stone-faced and armed. The car pulled into a private courtyard. The driver opened her door. "This way, miss." He led her through a side entrance, down corridors that smelled like old money and older secrets. Paintings watched from walls, suits of armor stood at attention like metal sentries. They stopped at a door, heavy wood, no ornamentation. The driver knocked once, then opened it. "Miss Voss, Your Majesty?" Then he was gone, and Alara was standing in the doorway of a private dining room, staring at the king. He stood by a window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the sun set over his empire. He'd traded the military jacket for something simpler, dark shirt, well-fitted pants, still no crown. He turned when she entered. "Miss Voss, thank you for coming." Like she'd had a choice. Alara stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a sound like a cell locking. The room was intimate. Small table set for 2. No servants, no guards. Just her and a man who could end her life with a word. "Please, sit." She sat. The chair was more comfortable than her entire apartment. The king settled across from her. Up close, in softer light, he looked tired, lines around his eyes, tension in his jaw. Human. "I imagine you're confused," he said. Alara's laugh was brittle. "That's one word for it." His mouth quirked. "What word would you use?" Terrified, he studied her. Fair enough. A door opened and servants appeared with food. Proper food, roasted meat, fresh vegetables, bread that actually had flavor. They set the plates down silently and disappeared. "Eat," the king said. "You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." He wasn't wrong. Alara picked up her fork. The silverware was heavier than she expected. Everything in this world carried more weight. They ate in silence for several minutes. The food was incredible. Alara tried not to show how hungry she was, but subtlety was difficult when you'd been living on factory rations. The king set down his fork. "I'll be direct. This court is built on performance. Every word calculated. Every gesture measured. I spend my entire life playing a role people need me to play." He gestured at the table between them. "This is not that." Alara swallowed a piece of bread that suddenly felt like gravel. "Then what is it?" "Curiosity. About what?" "You." The word hung there. Alara set down her fork carefully. "Your Majesty, I'm nobody. There's nothing interesting about me." The king leaned back in his chair. His gray eyes were sharp. "See, that's where you're wrong. Everyone in my world is someone. They're all desperate to be seen, to matter, to leverage their position into more power. They perform constantly because they think that's what survival requires. He paused. You don't perform. Because I can't afford to, Alara said. Her voice came out harder than intended. Performance requires resources. I'm too busy surviving. Exactly. She didn't understand. Didn't want to understand. This conversation was dangerous in ways she couldn't articulate. Why am I really here? She asked. The king was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window. Do you know what it's like to be a symbol instead of a person? Every decision I make is analyzed by hundreds of people looking for weakness. Every word is recorded and measured against tradition. I don't get to choose. I get to perform the choices that keep the empire stable. He turned to face her. And then I walked into that ballroom and saw you, standing in the corner like you were trying to disappear, and you looked at me like I was just a man. Alara's breath caught. You are just a man. The king smiled then. Actually smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger. Dangerous. No one has said that to me in years. He moved back to the table but didn't sit. Instead, he stood close enough that Alara had to look up to meet his eyes. I want to know what it's like to be seen without calculation, to have a conversation that isn't 3 layers of political maneuvering. His voice dropped. Can you give me that? Every survival instinct Alara possessed screamed at her to say no, to make an excuse, to run. But there was something in his eyes, something that looked like loneliness dressed in authority. She knew that look. Yes, she heard herself say. The king's expression shifted. Relief, maybe. Or something more dangerous. He sat down again, poured wine into both their glasses. Then tell me something true. Alara picked up her glass. The wine was deep red, expensive, probably worth more than a month of her wages. What do you want to know? Anything. Everything. Start with why you looked like you wanted to burn that ballroom down. Alara laughed. It came out bitter. Because everyone in that room looked at me like I was dirt. Like I'd contaminated their space just by breathing their air. And did that bother you? She met his stare. It made me furious. Good, the king said. Fury is honest. They talked for hours. Not about politics, not about the court, about real things. Alara told him about growing up invisible, about working factory shifts that ground people into dust, about learning to survive in a world that had decided her value before she was born. The king listened like every word mattered. In return, he told her about the cage that came with the crown, about watching his father break under the weight of expectation, about learning early that showing weakness meant death, so he'd locked every soft thing inside himself away. You're lonely, Alara said. It wasn't a question. The king's expression went carefully neutral. Kings don't get to be lonely. Everyone gets to be lonely. Not when you're a symbol. Symbols are created by people who need them, Alara said. That doesn't make them real. The king stared at her. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was rusty, like he'd forgotten how. You're dangerous, Miss Voss. Alara raised an eyebrow. I'm sitting in your palace eating your food. I'm the least dangerous person you'll meet all week. No, he said. His gray eyes were intent. You're the most dangerous person I've met in years, because you're real. And real things break through facades. He stood again, walked to the window. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. I want to see you again. Alara's heart did something complicated. Your Majesty. Darius? He interrupted. When we're alone, it's Darius. The use of his name felt like blasphemy, like stepping over a line she couldn't see but could feel. This is a bad idea, she said. He turned to look at her. Probably. The court will destroy me. Probably. Then why? Because I'm tired of living in a cage, and you're the first person in a decade who's looked at me and seen a man instead of a crown. The words settled into the space between them, heavy and irreversible. Alara should have said no, should have walked away, should have protected herself from a situation that could only end in disaster. But she'd spent her entire life being invisible, being nothing, being discarded by a world that had no use for people like her. And for the first time, someone was looking at her like she mattered. Okay, she said. The king's expression shifted. Something like hope flickered across his face before he locked it down. Tomorrow. Same time. Same time, Alara agreed. When the car dropped her back at her apartment, the sun was gone and the streets were dark. She climbed the stairs to her room in a daze. Inside, she sat on her cot and stared at nothing. What had she just done? Geek. The dinners became regular. Every few days, the car would arrive and Alara would be driven to the palace. Always the same private dining room. Always just the two of them. They talked. About everything. Nothing. Darius told her about the pressure of maintaining alliances, about council meetings that felt like gladiatorial combat, about the constant weight of knowing that every decision could trigger rebellion. Alara told him about factory life, about the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being worthless in society's eyes, about the small rebellions of surviving when the world wanted you to disappear. During their fourth dinner, Darius asked her about her family. Alara's expression went carefully blank. Don't have one. Everyone has family. Not everyone gets to keep them. He didn't push, just waited. Alara set down her fork. My mother died when I was 8. Fever. We couldn't afford a doctor. My father tried. He really did. But work was scarce and desperation makes people do stupid things. He got involved with some smugglers. Wrong people. Wrong cargo. She paused. They found his body in the river when I was 14. Darius's face was unreadable. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. Alara looked at him. No, it doesn't. He reached across the table. His hand covered hers. The touch was warm, solid. You survived, he said quietly. That takes a specific kind of strength, or a specific kind of stubbornness. Those are the same thing. They sat like that for a long moment, his hand over hers, two people from completely different worlds finding something like understanding. Then Alara pulled her hand back. This can't last, she said. You know that. Darius's expression hardened. I know what the court expects. Expectations become pressure. Pressure becomes demands. And if I refuse the demands? Alara met his stare. Then they'll remove the person causing the problem, which would be you. Yes. Darius leaned back. His jaw was tight. They can try. Your Majesty. Darius. Alara's voice rose despite herself. Darius, you're the king. I'm nobody. This, she gestured between them, whatever this is, it violates every rule your world is built on. Good. The word was flat, final. Alara stared at him. What? I said good. I'm tired of rules that exist to maintain a system designed to crush anyone who doesn't fit the mold. I'm tired of performing, of being a symbol, of pretending that power means more than humanity. He stood, started pacing. You asked me why I noticed you at that gala. Want to know the truth? Because everyone else in that room was performing, smiling, scheming, playing the game they'd been raised to play, and you were standing there looking like you wanted to burn the whole thing down. He stopped, turned to face her. That rage, that refusal to pretend, that's real. And I haven't felt anything real in so long I'd forgotten what it looked like. Alara's throat was tight. I'm not your rebellion project. No. You're the first person who's made me remember what it feels like to be human. The words hung there, dangerous and irrevocable. Alara stood. This was spiraling beyond her control and she needed air, needed space, needed to think. I should go. Darius didn't move to stop her, but his voice followed her to the door. Tomorrow, please. She paused. Didn't turn around. This will end badly. I know. Then why? Because for the first time in a decade, I don't feel like I'm suffocating. Alara closed her eyes, opened them, turned to look at him. The king of an empire, standing in a private dining room, looking at her like she was oxygen. Tomorrow, she said, and walked out before she could change her mind. The court noticed. Of course they noticed. The king's private dinners became gossip fodder. Servants talked, guards whispered. Within 2 weeks, every noble in the empire knew that Darius was spending time with a factory girl of no breeding, no status, no value. The reactions varied from amused to horrified. Alara felt the change immediately. At the factory, the other workers stopped talking when she entered a room. Mira started avoiding her. The foreman watched her with an expression caught between fear and calculation. On the street, people stared. Not friendly. Assessing. Like they were trying to figure out what angle she was working. One evening, walking home from the palace, 3 men cornered her in an alley. They didn't touch her. Didn't need to. The leader, scarred and smirking, leaned against the wall, blocking her exit. "Heard you're friendly with the king." Alara's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." The man's smile was ugly. Word of advice. Girls like you don't get happy endings with men like him. You're a distraction, entertainment, and when he's done, you'll disappear. He pushed off the wall. "So maybe disappear now. Save yourself the trouble." They left her standing in the alley, shaking with rage and fear. She told Darius about it the next evening. His expression went cold. "Describe them. It doesn't matter." "It matters." "Describe them." She did. Every detail she could remember. Darius stood, walked to the door, opened it, and spoke to someone outside. When he came back, his face was carved from stone. "They'll be dealt with." Alara's stomach turned. "What does that mean?" "It means they threatened you. That's not acceptable." "Darius, don't. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You can't punish every person who says something cruel. I can when they threaten you. And what happens when it's not 3 men in an alley? What happens when it's the High Council? When it's the noble houses? When it's the entire structure of your empire deciding I'm a problem that needs to be removed?" Darius's jaw worked. "Then I protect you." "You can't." Alara's voice cracked. "You're one person. Even if you're the king, there are limits to what power can do against an entire system designed to reject people like me." She stepped closer. "I knew this was dangerous. I came anyway. But I'm not naive enough to think this ends any way except badly." Darius caught her arms. His grip was firm, but not painful. "I don't accept that. Accepting reality isn't optional. Watch me." His gray eyes were fierce. "Absolute. You're asking me to risk everything," Alara said quietly. "My safety. My life. For what? A few months of dinners before reality crashes in? No. For the possibility that something real can exist even in a world built on performance and hierarchy. That's naive. Probably." His grip softened. "But I'm willing to be naive if it means not losing this." "This. What is this?" "I don't know yet, but I want the chance to find out." Alara closed her eyes. Every logical part of her brain screamed to run, to end this before it metastasized into something that would destroy her. But loneliness is a powerful thing. And being seen, really seen by someone who looked at her like she mattered, that was worth almost any risk. She opened her eyes. "Okay." Darius's expression shifted, relief and something darker, something that looked like possessiveness. He pulled her closer. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. They shouldn't do this. Every rule said they shouldn't. She kissed him anyway. His response was immediate. Controlled violence transformed into careful intensity. One hand tangled in her hair, the other pressed against the small of her back. Alara had been kissed before. Fumbling encounters with boys who saw her as easy because she had nothing to protect. Those kisses had been transactional, forgettable. This was different. This was a king deciding he wanted something and taking it. Except he wasn't taking. He was offering, asking, giving her the choice even though they both knew the choice was already made. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. The court will lose their minds. I know. They'll try to destroy you." Alara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Let them try." The smile that crossed his face was dangerous. Feral. "That's my girl." "Your girl?" "Mine." The possessiveness should have bothered her, should have triggered every warning about men who thought they owned women. But the way he said it wasn't about possession, it was about protection. And Alara, who'd spent her entire life unprotected, found she didn't mind nearly as much as she should have. They stood there, wrapped in each other, while outside the palace walls, an empire began to fracture around a choice neither of them could take back. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Alara arrived at the palace for their usual dinner to find the private dining room occupied. The High Council sat around the table like judges at a trial, 5 of them, old men with power etched into every line of their faces. They'd probably been handsome once. Now they were just monuments to survival. Chancellor Ravencroft stood at the head, 70 years old with silver hair and eyes like chipped ice. Miss Voss, please sit. It wasn't a request. Alara remained standing. Where's Darius? The king, Ravencroft corrected sharply, is detained. We thought it appropriate to have a conversation. Just us. About what? Lord Halford, broad and scarred from military campaigns, leaned forward. Don't be naive, girl. You know exactly what this is about. Enlighten me. Ravencroft's smile was thin. You've been spending considerable time with His Majesty, time that has not gone unnoticed. The court is concerned. Concerned about what? Alara asked. Her heart was hammering, but she kept her voice level. About the king's judgment, said Lady Vex. The only woman on the council, sharp-featured and sharper-minded. He is young, prone to impulsiveness. It is our duty to ensure his decisions serve the Empire. And you think I'm a bad decision. We think you're a distraction, Halford said bluntly. The king has responsibilities, duties, a legacy to protect, none of which include entertaining factory girls. The contempt in his voice was thick enough to cut. Alara's hands clenched at her sides. I didn't ask for this attention. No, Ravencroft agreed, but you're benefiting from it nonetheless. Tell me, Miss Voss, what exactly is your goal here? I don't have a goal. Everyone has a goal. Money? Status? Perhaps you're cleverer than you look, and you're angling for a more permanent position. The implication was clear. Alara's rage spiked hot and vicious. I'm not angling for anything. The king invited me. I accepted. That's all. That's all, Lady Vex repeated. Her tone suggested she didn't believe a word. Let me be clear, child. The king will marry. It is not a matter of if, but when. And that marriage will be a political alliance that strengthens the empire. She leaned forward. It will not be to you. I never thought it would be, Alara said. Then what do you want from him? Nothing. I want nothing. Everyone wants something, Halford growled. Maybe in your world, Alara shot back, but I don't come from your world. I didn't ask to be noticed. I didn't ask for any of this. The king saw me. He chose to continue seeing me. That's his decision. A decision we are correcting, Ravencroft said smoothly. Effective immediately, your access to the palace is revoked. You will not contact His Majesty. You will not speak publicly about your association. You will return to your life and be grateful we're allowing you to do so. Allowing me? This is not a negotiation, Miss Voss. This is us being merciful. The door burst open. Darius entered like a storm. His expression was absolutely murderous. What the hell is this? The council stood. Ravencroft's expression remained calm, but Alara saw the calculation in his eyes. Your Majesty, we were just having a conversation with Miss Voss about appropriate boundaries. Darius crossed the room to stand beside Alara. His presence was overwhelming, protective, without my knowledge, without my permission. In my private dining room, we felt it necessary, Lady Vex said. Your recent behavior has raised concerns. My behavior? Yes. The council has a responsibility that you have a responsibility to advise, not to ambush people I've invited into this palace. Ravencroft's tone sharpened. With respect, Your Majesty, your recent choices have been questionable at best. Spending time with this girl sends a message to the Empire that you are not taking your duties seriously. I'm very serious about my duties, Darius said quietly, which is why I'm telling you right now that who I spend time with is not your concern. Everything you do is our concern, Halford snapped. You're the king. Your marriage will be a political alliance. Your children will secure the bloodline. Your choices affect the stability of the empire. Darius's voice went cold. Get out. The council exchanged glances. Your Majesty. I said, get out. The words weren't loud, but they carried absolute authority. The council filed out. Slowly, each one pausing to give Alara a look that promised this wasn't over. When the door closed, Darius turned to her. Did they threaten you? Yes. His jaw worked. What did they say? That I'm a distraction, that I need to disappear, that your marriage will be political and I'm not part of the equation. Alara's voice steadied. They're not wrong. Darius caught her shoulders. They're absolutely wrong. Darius, no. Listen to me. I know what they expect. I know what tradition demands. And I'm telling you right now that I don't care. You have to care. You're the king, which means I get to decide what matters. Alara pulled away. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're about to start a war with your own council over a factory girl who has no place in your world. Darius's eyes were fierce. You have exactly the place I give you. That's not how power works. He stepped closer. His voice dropped. Then I'll change how power works. The words hung there. Impossible. Dangerous. Alara stared at him. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. They'll destroy you. Let them try. Darius, please, think about what you're saying. I have thought about it. I've thought about nothing else for weeks. He caught her hands. Every day I wake up in a cage built by tradition and expectation. Every decision I make is measured against what my father did, what his father did, what centuries of kings did before me. I don't get to choose. I get to perform. His grip tightened. And then you walked into my life. And for the first time in a decade, I remembered what it feels like to want something for myself. Not for the empire, not for the council, for me. Alara's throat was tight. That's selfish. Yes, it is. And I don't care. You're asking me to let you burn your entire world down for this. No. I'm telling you I'm going to do it anyway. The only question is whether you're willing to stand beside me while I do. The door opened again. A servant, pale and frightened. Your Majesty, the High Council has called an emergency session. They're demanding your presence immediately. Darius didn't take his eyes off Alara. Tell them I'll be there when I'm ready. The servant fled. Alara pulled her hands free. This is insane. You're about to walk into a room full of people who want me gone and you're going to what? Refuse them? Yes. They'll force your hand. They can try. Darius, please. Think. I have thought. I've thought about every possible outcome, every political ramification, every way this could go wrong. He stepped close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. And I've decided that I'd rather risk everything than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been if I'd been brave enough to choose for myself. His hand came up to cup her face. Stay. Please. Let me fight for this. Alara's eyes burned. You're going to lose. Maybe. But at least I'll have chosen the battle. The weight of the moment pressed down on both of them. Outside, an empire was fracturing. A council was mobilizing. Forces were aligning to crush a threat they couldn't allow to exist. And in a private dining room, a king was asking a girl with nothing to be brave enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, something real could survive in a world built on performance and power. Alara closed her eyes, opened them, met his stare. Okay, she whispered. Darius's expression cracked, relief and something fiercer. He kissed her, hard, desperate. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. This is going to get ugly. I know. They're going to come after you. I know. And I can't promise I can protect you from all of it. Alara's smile was bitter. I've been surviving in a world that wanted me dead since I was 14. I'm harder to kill than I look. Darius's laugh was rough. That's my girl. He straightened, became the king again, authority settling over him like armor. Wait here. I need to deal with the council. What are you going to tell them? The truth, which is that I'm done taking orders. He walked to the door, paused, looked back. When this is over, we're going to have a very long conversation about what happens next. I'm looking forward to it, Alara lied. He knew she was lying. She could see it in his eyes, but he left anyway. And Alara was alone in a palace built on hierarchy and blood, waiting for the consequences of a choice neither of them could take back. Outside, in the council chambers, King Darius Kael'thorne walked into a room full of men who'd spent their entire lives maintaining a system designed to crush anyone who didn't fit the mold. And he did something no king had done in 3 generations. He refused to obey. The empire would never be the same. The council chamber smelled like old power and older fear. Darius walked in and every head turned. 5 men, 1 woman, all of them architects of the Empire's survival, all of them convinced that survival meant crushing anything that threatened the established order. He took his seat at the head of the table, didn't wait for them to speak. Let's be clear about what this is. You ambushed a guest in my palace, threatened her, attempted to dictate who I can and cannot associate with. That ends now. Ravencroft's expression remained carefully neutral. Your Majesty, we acted out of concern for the stability of the Empire. My personal life doesn't threaten stability. Everything you do threatens or reinforces stability, Lady Vex said. Her voice was sharp, clinical. That is the nature of power. Your choices ripple outward, and your recent choice to associate with a commoner of no standing sends a message to every noble house in this empire that bloodlines no longer matter. They don't, Darius said flatly. The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Halford's face went red. Excuse me? Darius leaned forward. You heard me. Bloodlines are an artificial construct designed to maintain power in the hands of people who happen to be born to the right parents. That system is archaic, and I'm done pretending it serves anyone except the people already in power. That system, Ravencroft said carefully, has maintained order for 300 years. Order built on exclusion, on telling millions of people they're worthless because of circumstances they didn't choose. Darius's voice hardened. I'm the king. I don't need your permission to spend time with whoever I choose. You need our support, Chancellor Moreau said. A thin man with calculating eyes. Without the council's backing, your rule becomes tenuous at best. Then I'll rule without your backing. The words landed like a grenade. Lady Vex's expression shifted, careful calculation replacing diplomatic courtesy. You cannot be serious. I've never been more serious. Lord Halford stood, slammed his hand on the table. This is madness. You're talking about upending centuries of tradition for a girl you've known for weeks. I'm talking about making my own choices instead of being a puppet for a system that prioritizes stability over humanity. Humanity, Halford spat. You're the king. You don't get the luxury of humanity. Watch me. Darius stood. The movement was controlled, threatening. Here's what's going to happen. Miss Voss will continue to have access to this palace. She will be treated with the respect due any guest I personally invite. And if any of you attempt to threaten or intimidate her again, I will consider it a direct attack on my authority. You're making a mistake, Ravencroft said. His tone had gone cold. Then it's my mistake to make. The council sat in stunned silence. Finally, Lady Vex spoke. Her voice was ice. If you pursue this course, there will be consequences. I'm aware. The noble houses will not accept a commoner in your inner circle. Then they'll learn to accept it, or they'll learn what happens when they challenge my authority directly. Moreau's laugh was bitter. Authority requires consensus, Your Majesty. You can't rule alone. I can if I have to. Darius walked to the door, paused, turned back. One more thing. The council serves at my discretion, not the other way around. I suggest you remember that. He left them sitting there, shock and fury warring on their faces. Because in that moment, King Darius Calethorn had done something unprecedented. He'd chosen himself over the Empire. And in a world where kings were symbols before they were men, that choice was nothing short of revolution. Alara was still waiting when he returned. She'd been pacing the dining room, anxiety eating through her resolve. When the door opened and Darius walked in, she knew immediately that everything had changed. His expression was set, determined, dangerous. What did you do? I told them the truth, which was that I'm done being controlled by a system that values tradition over reality. He crossed to her, caught her hands. They're furious. They're going to push back. Hard. Things are about to get very difficult. Alara's throat was tight. You should have let me go. No, I really shouldn't have. His grip tightened. Listen to me. The council operates on one principle: maintain the status quo at any cost. But the status quo is broken. It's a system designed to keep people in their assigned places, to prevent change, to crush anything that threatens established power. He paused. I've been complicit in that system my entire life. I've made choices that hurt people because I was told those choices were necessary for stability. And I'm done. Alara stared at him. You're going to lose everything. Maybe, but at least I'll lose it on my own terms. That's not how power works, Darius. You can't just decide to break the rules because they're inconvenient. Why not? Who made those rules? Dead men who wanted to ensure their descendants stayed in power forever. I didn't choose this system. I inherited it, and I'm choosing to change it. There was something in his eyes, not just determination, something darker, obsessive. This isn't just about me, is it? Alara said quietly. No. Then what is it about? Darius released her hands, walked to the window. When he spoke, his voice was low. My father was a good king, by every traditional measure. He maintained alliances, crushed rebellions, kept the empire stable, and it destroyed him. He turned to face her. I watched him die slowly, piece by piece, every decision weighed against legacy, every choice measured against what his father would have done. He stopped being a person and became a function. And in the end, when he was dying, he told me the crown was a cage and I'd spend my entire life trying not to suffocate. Darius's jaw worked. I'm 28 years old. I've been king for 6 years. And every single day, I feel that cage closing in. Until you. Alara's breath caught. When I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human, to want something for myself, to make a choice that isn't calculated against political ramifications. He stepped closer. That's worth fighting for. Even if it costs you the empire. Especially if it costs me the empire. The words hung there. Absolute. Terrifying. Alara wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this was doomed, but she'd spent her entire life being told her place, being reminded that people like her didn't get to want things, didn't get to matter. And here was a king looking at her like she was worth burning an empire down for. The logical part of her brain screamed that this was obsession, not love, that he was using her as a symbol of rebellion against a system he hated. But the part of her that had been invisible for so long, that part wanted to believe. Okay, she said. Darius's expression shifted, relief and something fiercer. He pulled her close, kissed her like he was trying to prove something. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Alara pressed her forehead against his chest. This is going to get ugly. I know. People are going to get hurt. I know. And I'm going to be the weapon they use against you. Darius's arms tightened around her. Let them try. Bad. The first attack came within 48 hours. Alara was at the factory when the foreman called her into his office, a small room that smelled like machine oil and disappointment. He didn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, Alara. We have to let you go. Her stomach dropped. What? Why? New directive from upper management. They didn't give a reason, but they didn't need to. Alara could read between the lines. Someone powerful had made a call, applied pressure, and the factory had folded like wet paper. This is because of the king. The foreman's silence was answer enough. Alara's hands clenched. I haven't done anything wrong. Doesn't matter. Politics is politics, and you're caught in the middle. He finally looked at her. His expression was something like pity. My advice? Disappear. Find work somewhere else, somewhere they don't know your name. Alara walked out of that office feeling like she'd been gutted. She'd known this was coming, had known associating with Darius would have consequences, but knowing and experiencing were different animals. She made it 3 blocks before the rage hit. Not at the foreman, not even at whoever had pressured the factory, at herself. For being stupid enough to think this could work, for believing that maybe, just maybe, she could exist in Darius's world without being crushed by it. She was halfway home when the car pulled up beside her. Palace vehicle. Black. Expensive. The window rolled down. A guard she recognized from the dining room. Miss Voss. His Majesty requests your presence. Of course he did. She climbed in. The leather seats felt like mockery now. The drive to the palace was silent. The guard didn't try to make conversation. Probably had orders not to. Darius was waiting in the private dining room. He took one look at her face and knew. They fired you. It wasn't a question. Alara nodded. Didn't trust her voice. Darius's expression went dark. Dangerous. Who? Does it matter? Someone with enough power to make my employer fold. Could be any of a dozen noble houses looking to send you a message. She sat down heavily. This is what I was afraid of. They can't touch you directly, so they go after me. And everyone around me, until I'm so isolated and damaged that removing me becomes easy. Darius crossed to her, knelt so they were eye level. I'll take care of this. How? You can't force someone to employ me. I can make it politically and economically disastrous not to. That's exactly what I don't want. She caught his face in her hands. Don't you see what they're doing? Every time you defend me, you prove their point, that I'm a distraction, a weakness they can exploit. You're not a weakness. I am if they can use me to control you. Darius's jaw worked. Then we make you untouchable. Alara laughed, came out bitter. How? I'm nobody. I have nothing. You can give me all the protection in the world, and it won't change the fact that I'm a factory girl with no bloodline, no power, no value in their eyes. Then I'll give you value. You can't just create value out of nothing. Darius stood. His expression was calculating now, solving a problem. Actually, I can. What are you talking about? He started pacing. Strategic. Focused. The council wants to control who I associate with because they believe blood determines worth. Fine. We'll play their game differently. Darius, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that power is performative. It exists because people agree it exists, so we make them agree that you have value. How? By making you indispensable. That's insane. Probably. But it might work. He stopped pacing, turned to face her. I'm creating a new position. Royal liaison to the common citizens. Someone who interfaces between the palace and the general population. Advises me on how policies affect people outside the noble houses. Alara stared at him. You're making up a position to justify keeping me around. I'm creating a position that should have existed decades ago. The fact that it benefits you is secondary. That's transparent manipulation, and everyone will see right through it. Good. Let them. It's still a legitimate position, and you're qualified for it. I'm not qualified for anything. You've survived in conditions most nobles can't imagine. You understand how the empire functions from the bottom up. That's more qualification than half the advisors in this palace. Darius crossed back to her. This gives you official standing, a reason to be here that the council can't dismiss as easily. It's not perfect, but it's protection. Protection built on a lie. Protection built on a truth they don't want to acknowledge. That power requires understanding all levels of society, not just the top. Alara closed her eyes. You're risking so much, I know. For someone you barely know, I know you well enough. She opened her eyes, met his stare. What if I'm not worth it? Darius's expression softened. Then I'll have made the best mistake of my life. He pulled her up, into his arms. Say yes. Let me do this. Alara's resistance was crumbling. Every logical argument dissolved against the reality that she had no other options. No job, no prospects, no safety outside of what Darius could provide, which made her dependent on him, which was exactly what she'd feared. But dependency when you had nothing wasn't weakness, it was survival. Okay, she whispered. Darius exhaled, relief evident. I'll make the announcement tomorrow. Official appointment, full ceremony. That's going to cause a riot. Probably. But at least it'll be an interesting riot. Despite everything, Alara almost smiled. You're insane. Completely. He kissed her forehead, gentle, possessive. And for a moment, wrapped in his arms, Alara let herself believe that maybe this could work. That maybe she could survive in a world designed to destroy people like her, even if that survival came with a price she hadn't fully calculated yet. The announcement hit the empire like a bomb. Royal liaison to the common citizens. A position that had never existed. Granted to a girl with no qualifications, no bloodline, no right to be within 100 miles of palace politics. The court exploded. Noble houses issued formal complaints. The High Council demanded an emergency session. Pamphlets appeared on street corners calling Darius everything from incompetent to compromised to actively working to destroy the empire from within. Alara watched it all from inside the palace walls, feeling like she was standing at the center of a hurricane. Darius had given her quarters. Not extravagant. A simple suite in the east wing with a bedroom, sitting room, and enough space to breathe. It was still more luxury than she'd experienced in her entire life. She hated it. Not the luxury itself, but what it represented. She was a kept woman now, dressed up in borrowed legitimacy, given a pretend job, protected by a man whose obsession with her was starting to feel less like affection and more like possession. On the third day after the announcement, Mira showed up. Alara hadn't seen her since being fired, hadn't expected to see her again. But there she was, standing in the palace courtyard, looking uncomfortable and furious. They met in the gardens, public enough to be seen but private enough to talk. Mira didn't waste time on pleasantries. "What the hell are you doing?" "Surviving," Alara said. "This isn't surviving. This is suicide with fancy dressing. What was I supposed to do? They fired me, made me unemployable. I had no options. So you let the king give you a fake job and move you into the palace?" Mira's voice was harsh. "You're proving everything they said about you, that you're a social climber, that you seduced the king for power. I didn't seduce anyone. Doesn't matter. That's the story. And now you're living it." Alara's rage flared. "You don't know what it's like to have nothing, to be nothing, and then someone sees you and decides you're worth protecting." "Protection isn't love, Alara. I never said it was." "Then what is it?" The question sat heavy between them. Alara didn't have an answer. Mira's expression softened slightly. "Look, I get it. The king is powerful, attractive, and he's paying attention to you in a way nobody else ever has. That's intoxicating." She stepped closer. "But power doesn't love. It possesses. And right now, you're not his partner. You're his rebellion project, the thing he's using to prove he's not controlled by the system." "That's not true. Isn't it? Has he asked what you want, or has he just decided what you need and given it to you?" The words hit harder than Alara wanted to admit. "He's protecting me. He's keeping you. There's a difference." Mira reached out, caught Alara's hand. "I'm worried about you. This doesn't end well. And when it falls apart, you're the one who's going to bleed." "It's already falling apart," Alara said quietly. "I'm just trying to survive the collapse, then survive somewhere else. Get out of the capital, find work in another city, start over, and live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next attack is coming." Alara pulled her hand back. "At least here, I have protection. You have the illusion of protection. The second the king decides you're more trouble than you're worth, that protection disappears." "He won't. You sound very certain about a man you barely know." "I know enough." Mira shook her head. "I hope you're right, because if you're wrong, you're going to pay for this mistake with everything you are." She turned to leave. Paused. "Be careful, Alara. The king might think he's protecting you, but men like that don't protect. They own." Then she was gone, leaving Alara standing in a garden that cost more to maintain than she'd earned in her entire life, wondering if her friend was right. The High Council demanded an audience. Darius granted it, but this time he brought Alara. She sat beside him in the council chamber, not at the table, but close enough to be a statement. The council's reaction was immediate. Ravencroft's expression went cold. "Your Majesty, this is a private meeting. Miss Voss is the royal liaison to the common citizens. These discussions affect policy that impacts her jurisdiction. She stays." Lady Vex's tone was ice. "This is unprecedented." "Then consider it a precedent." Lord Halford looked like he wanted to overturn the table. "This is a mockery of centuries of protocol." "Protocol changes," Darius said flatly. "Get used to it." The tension in the room was suffocating. Chancellor Moreau leaned forward. His voice was deceptively calm. "Your Majesty, we understand you feel strongly about this, but the noble houses are in uproar. 3 have formally requested audiences to discuss their concerns. 5 more have threatened to withdraw their financial support for the spring campaign." He paused. "You're destabilizing the empire over a personal attachment." "I'm correcting a broken system," Darius countered. "One that's overdue for reform." "Reform doesn't happen overnight," Ravencroft said. "Certainly not through dramatic gestures that alienate your support base." "My support base will adapt. Or they'll rebel," Lady Vex said quietly. "You're forcing them to choose between tradition and loyalty to the crown. That's a dangerous position. Then they should choose wisely." Darius's tone was absolute. Alara sat silent through all of this, watching, listening, reading the calculation in every face around that table. They weren't arguing about her specifically. They were arguing about control. The council saw Darius's defiance as a crack in their authority. If the king could ignore their guidance on this, what else might he ignore? What other traditions might he overturn? She was a symptom, not the disease. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Lord Halford finally addressed her directly. "Tell me, Miss Voss, what exactly do you bring to this council?" Alara met his stare. "Perspective you lack." Halford's expression darkened. "Careful, girl. I'm not a girl. I'm the royal liaison to the common citizens. And I'm telling you that the policies this council creates look very different from the bottom than they do from the top. Policies designed to maintain stability," Moreau said. "Stability for who? The noble houses who've held power for centuries? Or the millions of people struggling to survive under systems designed to keep them powerless?" The room went silent. Ravencroft's voice was dangerous. "You overstep. I speak truth. If that's overstepping, perhaps the problem isn't me." Darius's hand found hers under the table. A warning or support. Hard to tell. Lady Vex studied Alara with calculating eyes. "You're articulate. I'll give you that. But articulation doesn't qualify you to advise the king on matters of state. Neither does being born to the right parents. But that's never stopped any of you." The insult landed perfectly. Halford surged to his feet. "I've heard enough. This farce ends now." "Sit down," Darius said. His voice was quiet, commanding. Halford remained standing. "You're making a mistake that will cost you everything. Then I'll pay the cost." Darius stood. The movement was controlled, threatening. "This meeting is over. The position stands. Miss Voss retains her appointment, and if any of you have concerns, you're welcome to submit them in writing." He turned to Alara, offered his hand. She took it. They walked out of that chamber together, leaving a council seething with impotent fury. In the hallway, Alara finally let herself breathe. "I probably shouldn't have antagonized them. Probably not. But it was magnificent." Darius's smile was dangerous, proud. "You're a natural. At making enemies? At refusing to be intimidated." He pulled her into an alcove, away from watching eyes. That was the first time most of them have been challenged directly in decades. They don't know how to handle it. They're going to retaliate. "I know." His hands settled at her waist. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He kissed her, hard, possessive. When they broke apart, Alara's heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with politics. "This is getting complicated. It's been complicated since the moment I noticed you." His gray eyes were intense. "But I'm not backing down. They need to understand that. I think they understand perfectly. That's why they're scared." Darius's expression shifted, something darker entering his features. "Let them be scared. Maybe it's time this empire learned to fear change instead of crushing it." The words should have reassured her. They didn't. Because Alara was starting to realize that Darius wasn't just defending her. He was using her as a weapon. A symbol of defiance against a system he'd spent his entire life serving. And symbols were easy to sacrifice when the revolution they represented demanded blood. The assassination attempt came on the 14th night. Alara was in her quarters, trying to sleep, when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Wrong rhythm, too quiet. She was out of bed instantly. Training from years of surviving dangerous neighborhoods kicked in. She grabbed the nearest weapon, a heavy candlestick from the mantel, and pressed herself against the wall beside the door. The lock clicked. The door opened slowly. 2 figures entered, dressed in black, faces covered, professionals. Alara's heart hammered, but she didn't move. Waited until they were fully inside, attention focused on the empty bed. Then she swung. The candlestick caught the first assassin across the temple. He dropped like a stone. The second one reacted instantly. Blade out, lunging. Alara dodged. Barely. The knife caught her sleeve, tearing fabric. She screamed. Not a fearful scream. A war cry. Loud enough to wake the entire wing. The assassin hesitated. Fatal mistake. Palace guards burst through the door. Weapons drawn. Within seconds, the second assassin was on the ground, restrained. Alara stood against the wall, breathing hard, candlestick still gripped in white-knuckled hands. Darius arrived minutes later, still in sleeping clothes, sword drawn, absolutely murderous. He took in the scene, the unconscious assassin, the restrained one, Alara alive but shaking. Are you hurt? His voice was deadly calm. No, I'm fine. He crossed to her, hands moving over her arms, her shoulders, checking for injuries despite her words. When he found the torn sleeve, his expression went dark. They touched you, barely. That's still too close. He turned to the guards. Take them to the dungeons. I want to know who sent them. Use whatever methods necessary. The guards dragged the assassins out. Darius pulled Alara into his arms, held her tight enough to bruise. You could have died. But I didn't. You shouldn't have to fight off assassins in your own quarters. His voice was rough, shaking with suppressed rage. I'm moving you, somewhere more secure. Darius! No arguments. This wing is too exposed. You're moving to the royal suites. That's going to look terrible. I don't care how it looks. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. You almost died tonight. Because of me. Because I made you visible to people who want to hurt me. The guilt in his expression was devastating. This is my fault. Alara caught his face. No. This is the fault of whoever sent those men. Don't take responsibility for other people's evil. I brought you into this world. I made you a target. You gave me protection, a place to exist. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Darius's jaw worked. I should have seen this coming. Should have anticipated they'd go after you directly. You can't predict everything. I can predict that desperate people do desperate things, and the council is getting desperate. He stepped back. Became the king again, cold. Calculating. This changes things. How? Because now they've crossed a line. Attempted murder of a royal appointee is treason, and treason has consequences. What are you going to do? Find out who gave the order, and make an example that ensures it never happens again. The darkness in his voice made Alara's blood run cold. Don't do something you'll regret. Regret is a luxury I can't afford. He walked to the door, paused. Pack your things. You're moving tonight. Then he was gone, leaving Alara alone in quarters that no longer felt safe, wondering what darkness she'd unleashed in a man who'd spent his entire life controlling his violent instincts. Epilogue. The interrogation took 6 hours. By dawn, Darius had his answer. The assassination attempt had been funded by a coalition of 3 noble houses, minor players individually, but together they'd pooled resources to hire professionals. Their logic was simple. Remove Alara. The king's distraction disappears. Order is restored. Darius's response was immediate and brutal. He stripped all 3 houses of their titles, seized their lands, arrested the heads of each family on charges of treason. The executions were scheduled for the following week. When Alara heard, she felt sick. She found Darius in his private study, maps spread across the desk, war planning or political strategy, hard to tell. You can't execute them. He didn't look up. They tried to have you killed. So arrest them, imprison them. But execution? It's the penalty for treason. This isn't justice. It's revenge. Darius finally met her eyes. His expression was stone. It's deterrence. If I show mercy, every noble house in this empire will see it as weakness. They'll try again. And next time they might succeed. So you kill people to prove a point? I kill traitors to protect what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice was unmistakable. Alara stepped closer. I'm not a possession. You're under my protection. That makes you mine to defend. That's not how this works. That's exactly how this works. You don't understand power, Alara. It's not about being right. It's about being feared enough that people don't test your boundaries. This is insane. This is survival. Darius stood, moved around the desk. Those men sent assassins into my palace, into your quarters. They violated every rule of engagement. If I don't respond with overwhelming force, I might as well paint a target on both our backs. There has to be another way. There isn't. His voice was final. Alara stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time what Mira had tried to warn her about. This wasn't protection. This was obsession. Darius wasn't defending her because he loved her. He was defending his choice, his right to keep what he'd decided belonged to him, and anyone who threatened that right would be crushed. You're scaring me, she whispered. Darius's expression softened fractionally. I'm keeping you alive. At what cost? Whatever it takes. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't. Just don't. Alara, You're using me as a weapon against a system you hate. And now people are dying because you decided I matter. They're dying because they committed treason. They're dying because you won't compromise. She wrapped her arms around herself. I never asked for this. Never asked to be worth killing for. You don't get to choose your worth. I do. The words hung there, brutal in their honesty. Alara's throat was tight. Then you've made me a prisoner. Darius's expression went carefully blank. That's not fair, isn't it? I can't leave, can't disappear, can't go back to my old life because you've made me too visible. The only safety I have is the protection you provide, which means I'm completely dependent on you. She met his stare. That's not freedom. That's a cage with better furnishings. Darius's jaw worked. I gave you a position, status, power. You gave me what you decided I needed, without asking what I wanted. What do you want? The question was sharp, almost angry. Alara's laugh was bitter. I want to not be responsible for people dying. I want to not be a political weapon. I want to just exist without it being a revolutionary act. You can't have that. Not anymore. Because of you. Because of them, Darius corrected. I didn't create this system. I'm just refusing to let it dictate my choices. By forcing your choices onto me, the accusation landed. Darius's expression cracked, showed something raw underneath. I'm trying to protect you. I know. And that's the problem. Alara moved to the window, looked out at gardens she couldn't walk through without guards, a palace that felt more like a prison every day. You can't love someone and control them, Darius. That's possession. And I've spent my entire life being treated like I'm worthless. I won't trade that for being treated like property. Even if that property is cherished? Especially if it's cherished. Because then the cage comes wrapped in affection, and I'm supposed to be grateful. She turned to face him. I need you to hear me, really hear me. If you execute those men, you're proving to the entire empire that anyone who threatens what you consider yours will be destroyed. That's not protection. That's tyranny. It's justice. It's overkill. And it makes you exactly what they accuse you of being. A king who's lost perspective, who's willing to burn the empire down rather than compromise. Darius's face was carved from stone. I won't compromise on your safety. Then we're at an impasse. The words settled between them, heavy, final. Darius crossed to her, caught her shoulders. I can't lose you. Then stop treating me like a possession you're defending. Start treating me like a person who gets a say in her own fate. His grip tightened. What do you want me to do? Show mercy to people who tried to have you killed? I want you to consider that maybe, just maybe, responding to violence with more violence isn't the answer. It's the only answer they understand. Then help them understand something else. Alara's voice cracked. Please, don't do this. Don't become the monster they say you are. Not for me. Darius stared at her, something warring in his expression. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he released her, stepped back. I'll consider it. That's not a yes. It's all I can give you right now. He walked to the door, paused. The executions are in 5 days. I'll make my final decision before then. Then he was gone, leaving Alara alone in a study filled with maps of an empire fracturing under the weight of one man's refusal to bend. And for the first time since this began, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, not in accepting Darius's protection, but in believing that protection and freedom could coexist when the protector had absolute power. The next 4 days were silent agony. Darius withdrew. Not physically. He still ensured Alara was moved to secure quarters, still posted guards, still made sure she was safe. But emotionally, he'd locked himself away. Alara tried to reach him, sent messages requesting meetings. They went unanswered. She tried approaching his quarters. The guards turned her away with apologetic expressions. The king was busy. The king was in meetings. The king would contact her when he was available. She was being shut out. On the 4th day, Lady Vex requested an audience. Alara almost refused, but curiosity won. They met in a neutral room, no guards, just 2 women on opposite sides of a war neither had chosen. Lady Vex was elegant, composed, the kind of woman who'd learned to survive in a male-dominated court by being sharper than everyone around her. She sat across from Alara and studied her with calculating eyes. You're more resilient than I expected. Is that a compliment? An observation. Most women in your position would have crumbled by now. Most women in my position would never have been in this position to begin with. Lady Vex's mouth twitched. Fair point. She leaned forward. I'm not here to threaten you or convince you to leave. I suspect you've heard enough of that. Then why are you here? Because you're the first person in a decade who's made the king question the system, and I find that fascinating. Alara's guard went up. What do you want? Honestly, I want to understand what you see in him. The question caught her off guard. He's... Alara paused. Complex. He's a dictator in training, Lady Vex said bluntly. I watched his father break under the pressure of absolute power, watched him become paranoid, violent, impossible to reason with. Darius is walking the same path. He's nothing like his father. Not yet. But power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's not philosophy. It's observation. Lady Vex's expression was serious. You think you're saving him, making him more human, but you're doing the opposite. You're giving him a reason to ignore counsel, to override protocol, to consolidate power in ways that will destroy him. I'm not trying to save anyone. Then what are you trying to do? Survive. The word came out more honest than Alara intended. Lady Vex studied her. Then she nodded slowly. I believe you. Which makes this worse. Because you're not a schemer. You're just a woman caught in forces beyond your control. And that means when this collapses, you won't see it coming. She stood. The executions happen tomorrow. The king hasn't changed his mind. And when those men die, the noble houses will fracture. Some will submit, others will rebel. And this empire will descend into civil war. She paused at the door. You wanted to survive? Then leave. Tonight. Before it's too late. And go where? Anywhere but here. Lady Vex's expression was almost kind. You seem like a decent person, Miss Voss. Don't let yourself be destroyed by a king who's forgotten how to compromise. Then she was gone, leaving Alara sitting in an empty room, trying to decide if the woman was manipulating her or offering genuine advice. Both, probably. That night, Alara made a decision. She had to try one more time. She bypassed the guards, slipped through servant corridors she'd learned in her weeks at the palace, found her way to Darius's private quarters. He was standing at the window, staring out at the city he ruled. When she entered, he didn't turn around. You shouldn't be here. I know. She crossed to him, stood close enough to touch, but didn't. Please, don't do this. You already made your argument, and you're still not listening. Darius finally turned. His expression was exhausted, haunted. What do you want from me, Alara? To show mercy to people who tried to kill you? To prove I'm weak? To give the council ammunition to use against me? I want you to be better than them. I am better than them. That's why I'm still in power. Power isn't the measure of a person. It's the only measure that matters. The words were bitter. Alara caught his hand. You told me once that the crown was a cage, that you felt like you were suffocating. I remember. Then stop choosing the cage. Stop letting the system dictate what kind of king you have to be. The system is all there is. No, you are. Your choices, your humanity, that's what defines you, not tradition, not protocol, you. She squeezed his hand. Show them mercy. Not because it's weak, because it's strong, because it proves you're more than just violence and control. Darius stared at her, something broken in his eyes. If I show mercy, people will die. Different people. Because they'll see weakness and exploit it. Maybe. Or maybe they'll see a king who's strong enough to choose compassion over revenge, who's secure enough in his power that he doesn't need to prove it with blood. That's naive. It's hope. Darius pulled his hand free, turned back to the window. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I don't know how to be that king. The admission hung there, vulnerable, real. Alara stepped closer, pressed against his back, wrapped her arms around him. Then learn, with me. For a long moment, they stood like that. Two people trying to find humanity in a system designed to crush it. Then Darius turned, caught her face in his hands. If I do this, if I show mercy, and it costs us everything, will you forgive me? Alara's throat was tight. There's nothing to forgive. He kissed her, desperate, searching. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I'll commute the sentences. Exile instead of execution. The relief that flooded through Alara was overwhelming. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to have consequences. I know. And you're willing to face them? Yes. Darius's arms tightened around her. Then we face them together. The announcement came at dawn. King Darius Calethorn, by royal decree, commuted the sentences of the three noble houses from execution to permanent exile. All titles and lands remained seized, but the condemned would live. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The noble houses fractured exactly as Lady Vex had predicted. Some saw mercy as weakness. Others saw it as proof the king could be manipulated. Within hours, 3 more houses formally declared their intention to withdraw support from the crown. By evening, rumors of rebellion were spreading through the capital like wildfire. And in the palace, Darius and Alara stood at the center of a storm they'd created, neither of them knowing that the real catastrophe was still coming. Because mercy, in a world built on dominance, wasn't seen as strength. It was seen as an opportunity. And those who'd been waiting for weakness to exploit had just been given exactly what they needed to move against a king who'd finally shown he could be swayed. The civil war everyone had feared was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. The first blow came from within. Darius was in the war room when Lord Commander Arcturus requested a private audience. The man had served 3 kings, survived 2 assassination attempts, bled for the empire in wars that had carved the current borders into stone. If anyone was loyal, it was him. Arcturus closed the door. His weathered face was unreadable. Your Majesty, we need to talk. Darius looked up from the map spread across the table. Troop movements, supply lines, contingency plans for the rebellion that was no longer theoretical. About what? About the fact that you're losing control. The words were blunt. Military. No diplomatic softening. Darius set down the stylus he'd been using to mark positions. I'm aware of the situation. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you've alienated half the noble houses, given the council reason to question your judgment, and sparked the beginning of a civil war. All for a girl. Careful, Darius said quietly. Arcturus didn't back down. I've served you for 6 years. Served your father before you. I've earned the right to speak plainly. He stepped closer. You're making decisions with your heart instead of your head. That gets kings killed. I'm making decisions that should have been made decades ago. You're destroying the empire to prove a point. I'm changing a system that's broken. Arcturus's expression hardened. Change requires consensus, strategy, time. You're trying to revolutionize overnight, and it's tearing us apart. Then let it tear. Maybe the empire needs to break before it can be rebuilt properly. The Lord Commander studied him, something cold entering his eyes. I see. You've already made your choice. I have. Then I'm afraid I can't follow you anymore. The words landed like a physical blow. Darius went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying that as of now, I'm resigning my commission. I will not lead troops into a civil war started because the king couldn't keep his personal life separate from his duty. You're abandoning me. I'm refusing to participate in your self-destruction. Arcturus straightened. Formal. Final. I've submitted my resignation to the High Council, effective immediately. Darius felt something crack in his chest. You swore an oath. To the Empire. Not to you personally. And right now, those are 2 different things. The Lord Commander moved to the door. Paused. For what it's worth, I understand why you're doing this. The girl makes you feel human. I get it. But kings don't get to be human. They get to be symbols. And when symbols start acting like men, empires fall. Then watch it fall. Darius's voice was ice. But don't pretend you're leaving out of principle. You're leaving because you're afraid. Because change terrifies you more than stagnation. Arcturus's jaw tightened. Think what you want. But when this empire burns, remember I tried to stop you. He left. The door closed with a sound like a coffin ceiling. Darius stood alone in the war room, staring at maps that suddenly felt pointless. His most trusted military advisor. Gone. Not killed, not forced out. He'd chosen to leave, and if Arcturus had lost faith, How many others were waiting to do the same? The second blow came faster. Within hours of Arcturus's resignation, 3 senior military officers followed suit, then 2 royal advisors, then the master of coin. The palace was hemorrhaging leadership. Alara found Darius in his private quarters. He was standing at the window again, that same position she'd found him in so many times. But now his shoulders were rigid, defensive. She'd heard about Arcturus, about the cascading resignations. The Empire was rejecting him. Darius, talk to me. He didn't turn around. There's nothing to say. People are abandoning you. People are making their choices. Same as I made mine. His voice was flat, emotionless. Alara crossed to him, tried to touch his arm. He pulled away. Don't. Don't what? Don't try to comfort me. This is the consequence of mercy, of choosing humanity over strength. This is what happens when a king shows weakness. Showing mercy isn't weakness. Tell that to everyone currently fleeing my service. He finally turned to face her. His gray eyes were cold. You asked me to be better, to choose compassion. I did. And now I'm watching my empire fracture because the people who should support me have decided I'm not worth following anymore. That's not fair. Fair. Darius's laugh was bitter. You don't understand what I've sacrificed, what I've lost. I had absolute authority, complete control. And I gave it up because you made me believe there was another way. There is another way. No, there isn't. There's strength or there's collapse. And I chose collapse. He moved past her, started pacing. The military is fracturing. The council is in open rebellion. Half the noble houses are talking secession. And it's all because I showed mercy to people who tried to kill you. You're blaming me. It wasn't a question. Darius stopped. His expression cracked, showed something raw. I'm blaming myself for being stupid enough to think I could have both, power and humanity, control and love. Love. The word hung there. First time either of them had used it. Alara's throat was tight. Is that what this is? I don't know anymore. Darius's voice broke. All I know is that I'm losing everything, and the only thing that made it feel worthwhile is standing in front of me telling me to be better while my empire burns. Then let it burn. Alara stepped closer. You said it yourself. Maybe it needs to break before it can be rebuilt. Maybe losing people who only followed you out of fear is a good thing. Those people kept the empire stable. Stability isn't the same as justice. Justice doesn't matter if we're all dead. The door burst open. A guard. Pale. Terrified. Your Majesty, the High Council has called an emergency session. They're demanding your immediate presence. Of course they are. Darius's expression went cold. Distant. He looked at Alara. Whatever comes next, stay here. Don't leave these quarters. What's happening? Something that's been building since the moment I refused to obey them. He walked to the door. Darius. Wait. He paused. Didn't turn around. I'm sorry, Alara said quietly, for all of this. Don't be. You didn't create this mess. You just made me see it clearly. Then he was gone, and Alara was left standing in quarters that felt more like a cage every second, knowing that whatever was about to happen would change everything. She just didn't know how catastrophically. The council chamber was packed. Not just the High Council. Every major noble house had representatives present. Military officers, trade guild masters, religious leaders despite their diminished political power. This wasn't a meeting, it was a trial. Darius walked in and every eye tracked him like a predator watching prey. He took his seat, didn't wait for formalities. Let's get this over with. Ravencroft stood. His expression was carved from stone. King Darius Calethorn. We, the assembled representatives of this empire, have convened to address a matter of grave importance. Your recent actions have destabilized the realm, your judgment has been compromised, and your continued rule poses a threat to the security and prosperity of the empire. Darius's voice was ice. Is this a coup? This is an intervention. Lady Vex rose. Her tone was clinical. We are invoking Article 7 of the Imperial Charter. When a monarch is deemed unfit to rule, the High Council may call for a vote of confidence. If the vote fails, succession protocols are triggered. You're trying to remove me. We're trying to save the Empire from your self-destructive choices. Lord Halford stood. His voice boomed. You have abandoned protocol, elevated a commoner to a position she has no qualification for, shown mercy to traitors, driven away your most experienced advisors, and sparked the beginning of a civil war. All for a woman. He pointed at Darius. That is not the behavior of a fit ruler. That is the behavior of a man compromised by personal attachment. Personal attachment, Darius said quietly, doesn't invalidate my authority. It does when it compromises your judgment. Chancellor Moreau stepped forward. Your Majesty, we're not your enemies. We're trying to protect you, protect the Empire. But you've left us no choice, because I won't obey you blindly, because you're destroying everything your father built. My father built a system that crushed anyone who didn't fit the mold. I'm trying to fix that. By tearing it all down. Ravencroft's voice was sharp. Reform requires careful planning, strategic implementation. You're acting like a revolutionary, not a king. Maybe this empire needs a revolution. The room went silent, then erupted. Voices overlapping, accusations flying, the careful veneer of civility shattered. Darius sat through it all, stone-faced, listening to people he'd served, people he'd protected, call him unfit, compromised, dangerous. Finally he stood. The room fell silent. You want to call a vote? Fine. Call it. But understand this. If you remove me, you're not saving the Empire. You're proving that this system only works when everyone stays in their assigned place. That change is impossible. That power belongs only to those born to wield it. He looked around the room. I made a choice. To see a person instead of a position. To value humanity over hierarchy. And you've decided that choice makes me unfit to rule. His voice hardened. So vote. Remove me if you think you can hold this empire together without me. But when it all falls apart, remember that you chose tradition over evolution, fear over courage. Ravencroft's expression was unreadable. Then, let's vote. A voice from the back stopped him. Wait! Everyone turned. Lady Vex was standing, but her expression had changed, something calculating in her eyes. Before we vote, I think we should hear from the source of this controversy. Miss Alara Voss should address this council. The room exploded again. Protests, agreement, chaos. Darius's voice cut through. No. She's not part of this. She's the entire reason for this, Lady Vex said smoothly. If we're judging your fitness to rule based on your attachment to her, she should have the opportunity to speak. This is manipulation. This is transparency. Lady Vex's smile was thin. Unless you're afraid of what she might say. The trap was obvious. If Darius refused, he looked like he was hiding something. If he agreed, Alara would be thrown into a hostile room full of people who wanted her destroyed. Fine, Darius said. His jaw was tight. Bring her. A guard was dispatched. The wait was excruciating. Then the doors opened and Alara walked in. She looked small, surrounded by wealth and power and centuries of accumulated authority, but she held her head up. Darius wanted to pull her out, to protect her from what was coming, but he'd already made the choice that brought her here. Lady Vex gestured to the center of the room. Miss Voss, thank you for joining us. The courtesy was poisonous. Alara stood in the center of the circle, every eye on her. You've been accused of compromising the king's judgment, of using your position to manipulate him, of being the catalyst for the current instability threatening our empire. Lady Vex paused. What do you say to these charges? Alara's voice was steady. I say they're partially true. The room went silent. Darius's heart stopped. Alara continued. I have compromised his judgment, not through manipulation, but by being human in a world that wanted him to be a symbol, by refusing to perform, by showing him that power doesn't have to mean isolation. She looked around the room. But the instability? That's not on me. That's on a system so fragile that one person choosing compassion over cruelty threatens to tear it apart. You speak of things you don't understand, Halford growled. I understand perfectly. I understand that you've built an empire on exclusion, on telling millions of people they don't matter because of who their parents were. And when one of your own decided that system was wrong, you panicked. Careful, girl. I'm not a girl. And I'm not afraid of you. Alara's voice strengthened. You want to blame me for the king's choices? Fine. Blame me. But understand that those choices were his, not mine. I didn't ask to be elevated. I didn't ask to be protected. I didn't ask for any of this. Then why did you accept it? The question came from Ravencroft. Alara met his stare. Because I was tired of being invisible. Because for the first time in my life, someone saw me and decided I was worth defending. Even if that defense was misguided. Misguided, Lady Vex repeated. Interesting choice of words. Alara turned to her. The king thinks he's protecting me, but really he's using me as a weapon against a system he hates. I'm not a person to him. I'm a symbol, just like he's a symbol to you. Darius's hands clenched. That's not true. Isn't it? Alara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You didn't ask what I wanted. You decided what I needed. You gave me a position I never asked for, protection I never requested. You made me visible and then acted like that visibility was a gift. She stepped toward him. But visibility in a hostile world isn't a gift, it's a target. And now people are dying, rebelling, abandoning you, all because you decided I was worth breaking your empire for. Alara's voice cracked. I never asked to be worth that much. The silence was absolute. Darius stared at her, feeling like he'd been gutted. What are you saying? I'm saying this needs to stop. Before more people get hurt. Before this empire tears itself apart. Alara turned back to the council. You want me gone? Fine. I'll go. Exile me. Send me somewhere far enough away that I'm no longer a threat. Let the king go back to ruling without this distraction. No. Darius's voice was raw. Alara looked at him. Her expression was devastated. It's the only way. I won't allow it. It's not your choice anymore. She turned to Ravencroft. I formally request exile. Effective immediately. Send me anywhere. I don't care where. Just end this. Ravencroft studied her, then nodded slowly. The council will take your request under advisement. He looked at Darius. Your Majesty, do you contest this request? Every fiber of Darius's being screamed yes. But Alara's eyes were pleading with him, begging him to let her go, to save himself by sacrificing her. The room waited, and Darius realized with absolute clarity that he'd lost. Not to the council, to reality. He'd tried to change an empire overnight, to force evolution on a system designed to resist it. And in doing so, he destroyed the one thing he'd been trying to protect, Alara's humanity. He turned her into a symbol, a weapon, a political statement. Just like the council had done to him his entire life, the hypocrisy was crushing. No, he said quietly. I don't contest it. Alara's face crumpled. Ravencroft nodded. Then the council votes. All in favor of exile for Miss Alara Voss? Every hand went up. Unanimous. The decree is made. Miss Voss will be escorted to the port city of Halvern. She will board a ship to the outer territories and will not return to the capital or any major city within the Empire's borders. Ravencroft's voice was final. Effective immediately. Guards moved forward. Not rough, but inexorable. Alara didn't resist. She looked at Darius one last time. I'm sorry. Then she was gone, escorted from the chamber, from the palace, from his life. And Darius stood in front of a council that had just won, feeling like he'd been carved hollow. Ravencroft's voice cut through the silence. Now, let's discuss the vote of confidence. Tag. The vote was delayed. With Alara gone, the immediate crisis had been resolved. The council decided to give Darius time to prove he could rule effectively without the distraction. Translation. They were watching, waiting for him to fail. Darius went through the motions, attended meetings, reviewed military reports, made decisions that felt like ashes in his mouth. But inside, he was breaking. Not because he'd lost Alara, because he'd realized too late what he'd done to her. He'd seen a person and decided she needed saving, had imposed his protection without asking if she wanted it, had elevated her without considering that elevation in a hostile environment was just a different kind of cage. He'd done to her exactly what the Empire had done to him, made her a symbol instead of a person. And she'd been brave enough to recognize it, brave enough to leave. On the third night after her exile, Darius found a letter in his quarters, Alara's handwriting. Must have been left before she was taken. He almost didn't read it. But cowardice had never been his weakness. He broke the seal. Chat. Darius, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. And before you spiral into guilt or rage or whatever emotion you're drowning in right now, understand something. I don't regret meeting you. I regret what we became to each other. You saw me in that ballroom and I saw you. Two people trapped in systems that had decided who we were before we could choose for ourselves. The connection was real. Everything after was performance. You performed the role of protector. I performed the role of grateful recipient. And we both convinced ourselves it was love. Maybe it could have been, but love requires seeing someone as they are, not as a symbol of what you're fighting against. You didn't fall in love with me, Darius. You fell in love with the idea of choosing for yourself, of defying a system you hated. I was just convenient, and I let you, because being seen felt so good that I didn't care why you were looking. That's on both of us. The empire is fracturing because you tried to force change too fast, but also because the system is broken and was always going to break eventually. You just accelerated the timeline. Was it worth it? I don't know. But I know this. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. You can't force evolution. And you can't love someone while simultaneously controlling every aspect of their existence. Those are lessons I learned too late. Maybe you'll learn them faster. There's a rebellion coming. You know it. I know it. The council knows it. When it arrives, you're going to have to choose. The man you are, or the king they need you to be. Choose the king, because the man makes decisions with his heart. And in a world this cruel that gets everyone you love killed, I'm not asking you to forget me. I'm asking you to let me go. Really let me go. Not as a failure, not as a sacrifice, but as a person who made a choice. Same as you did. Survive this, Darius. And maybe when the empire is rebuilt and the system is actually changed instead of just broken, we'll find each other again. As people, not symbols. E. Darius read the letter 3 times, then he burned it, watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. She was right, about all of it. He'd used her as a weapon against a system he hated, had convinced himself it was love when really it was rebellion wearing affection's mask, and in trying to protect her, he'd destroyed her. The guilt was crushing, but guilt was a luxury he couldn't afford, because Alara's letter had been prophetic. The rebellion arrived 5 days after her exile. 3 noble houses in the northern territories declared independence, refused to recognize Darius's authority, began raising armies. The civil war everyone had feared was no longer theoretical. It was here. And Darius stood at the center of an empire fracturing along every fault line his choices had exposed. The council called another emergency session. This time, the vote of confidence wasn't delayed. Ravencroft stood before the assembled representatives. King Darius Calethorn. In light of recent events, the council has determined that your continued rule poses an unacceptable risk to the empire's stability. We are calling for an immediate vote of confidence. He paused. All in favor of maintaining the current king? Silence. Not one hand went up. Not one voice spoke in his defense. Darius looked around the room at people he'd served, protected, bled for, and saw nothing but calculation. All opposed? Every hand rose. The vote was unanimous. Ravencroft's expression was unreadable. By the authority vested in this council, and in accordance with Article 7 of the Imperial Charter, King Darius Calethorn is hereby removed from power. Succession protocols will be enacted immediately. Guards move forward. Not his guards. Council guards. Darius could have fought. Could have called loyal troops. Could have turned this room into a bloodbath. But what was the point? He'd already lost. Not the throne. Everything that mattered. He allowed himself to be escorted from the chamber, from the palace, from the power he'd held his entire adult life. As they led him through halls he'd walked as king, Darius felt something shift inside him. Not acceptance, clarity. Alara had been right. You couldn't change a system from within by trying to be human. The system crushed humanity. That was its function. If he wanted real change, he'd have to burn it all down and rebuild from ashes. And you couldn't do that from a throne. You did it from the outside. The guards brought him to a private residence on the palace grounds. Not a prison, but not freedom either. House arrest while the council figured out what to do with the deposed king who still had enough loyal followers to be dangerous. They left him there, alone. And for the first time in 6 years, Darius wasn't the king. He was just a man who'd lost everything trying to do the right thing. The question was, what did a man do when the system he'd tried to change had rejected him completely? Darius stood at the window of his prison, watching the sun set over an empire that no longer belonged to him, and started planning, because Alara's final words echoed in his mind. Choose the king. But she'd been wrong about one thing. The king was a symbol, a function, a role designed to maintain the status quo. What the empire needed wasn't a king, it needed a revolutionary. And if Darius couldn't change the system from within, he'd tear it down from without. Let the council scramble to find a successor. Let the noble houses fight over scraps of power. Let the rebellion fracture the northern territories. While they were all distracted by the immediate crisis, Darius would build something new. An alliance not of nobles, but of the forgotten, the exiled, the discarded, the people the empire had spent centuries crushing, starting with the one person who understood exactly what that felt like. Darius turned from the window. They'd taken his crown, his authority, his official power, but they couldn't take his will, or his rage, or his absolute determination to make them regret teaching him that humanity was weakness. Somewhere in the outer territories, Alara was starting a new life, probably thinking she'd never see him again. She was wrong, because this wasn't over. It was just beginning. And when Darius Calethorn returned, it wouldn't be as a king begging for his throne back. It would be as something far more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose and an empire to burn. The council thought they'd won by removing him. They'd just created their worst nightmare. Someone who understood power intimately, who knew every weakness in the system, who had the strategic mind to exploit them all, and who no longer had to pretend to care about stability. Darius smiled. It was not a kind expression. Let them celebrate their victory. Let them think the crisis was over. When the real war came, they'd understand too late that deposing a king didn't eliminate the threat. It just removed the restraints. And an unrestrained Darius Calethorn, with nothing but vengeance and revolution in his heart? That was the kind of enemy that toppled empires. The kind that changed history, the kind that made legends. He just needed to get out of this cage first, and Darius had spent his entire life learning how to break free from cages. This one would be no different. Outside, guards patrolled. Inside, a deposed king began plotting the end of everything his ancestors had built, because sometimes the only way to save something was to destroy it completely and rebuild from ashes, even if those ashes included everything you once were. The escape took 3 days to plan. Darius had been watching the guards since the moment they'd locked him in. 8-hour rotations, 3 men per shift. Military trained but complacent. They were guarding a deposed king, not a threat. That arrogance would cost them. On the 4th night, when the moon was dark and the city slept, Darius made his move. The guard rotation changed at midnight. 30 seconds of transition when the old shift left and the new one hadn't fully settled. Darius had timed it 17 times over the past 3 days. The window was razor thin, but it existed. He picked the lock on his quarters with a piece of wire salvaged from the curtain rods. Child's play. His father had taught him tactical skills that went far beyond ceremonial swordplay, breaking and entering, silent movement, how to kill efficiently with improvised weapons, skills a king should never need, skills a revolutionary required. The door opened soundlessly. Darius moved into the hallway like a shadow. The new guards were still organizing at the main entrance. He went the opposite direction. Through the servants' corridors, he'd mapped mentally over 6 years of living in this palace. 3 minutes to reach the outer wall, 2 minutes to scale it using maintenance handholds that weren't supposed to exist, but every building had them if you knew where to look. Then he was over, dropping into an alley that smelled like refuse and forgotten lives. Free. For the first time in 6 years, no one was watching him. No council, no advisors, no guards ensuring he stayed where power wanted him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his entire reign feeling trapped by the crown. Now that it was gone, he felt more dangerous than he ever had while wearing it. Because power constrained by responsibility is manageable. Power unleashed by nothing left to lose is catastrophic. Darius moved through the capital's back streets like a ghost. He'd prepared for this. Stashed civilian clothes in a dead-drop location 3 blocks from the palace 2 days before the vote. Changed quickly. Became nobody. Just another man in a city full of them. The docks were on the eastern edge. 4 miles through neighborhoods that shifted from merchant class to working poor to outright destitute. Darius saw his empire from ground level for the first time in his life. It was worse than he'd imagined. Families sleeping in doorways, children with hollow eyes and protruding ribs. The stench of desperation so thick it coated the back of his throat. This was what his father had built, what the council maintained, what centuries of tradition had produced. A system that crushed millions so a few hundred could live in marble and gold. The rage that had been simmering since his deposition crystallized into absolute clarity. This empire didn't deserve to survive. It deserved to burn, and he would be the one to light the match. The docks were controlled by a smuggling operation run by a woman named Kess, ex-military, dishonorably discharged for refusing an order that would have massacred civilians. She'd built a network moving people and goods the empire wanted invisible. Darius had known about her for years, had chosen not to shut her down because sometimes you needed people operating outside the law. He found her warehouse an hour before dawn, knocked the pattern he'd memorized from intelligence reports. The door opened. A guard twice Darius's size with scars that told stories. "We're closed. Tell Kess that the fallen king requests passage." The guard's expression didn't change, but his hand moved toward a concealed weapon. "Wait here." The door closed. Darius waited, adrenaline still singing through his veins from the escape. Part of him expected palace guards to appear any second, but the street remained empty. The door opened again. The guard gestured him inside. Kess was waiting in an office that smelled like salt air and contraband. She was 50, hard, the kind of woman who'd survived things that would break most people. She studied Darius with eyes that missed nothing. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid coming here. Probably both." Darius sat without being invited. "I need transport to Halvern." Discreetly. Kess leaned back in her chair. "Halvern is 2 weeks by ship. That's not cheap. I don't have money." "Then we don't have a deal." Darius met her stare. "I have information about the council's supply routes, their military deployments, every weakness in their infrastructure." He paused. "You help me get to Halvern, and I give you everything you need to bleed this empire dry." Kess's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Interest. Calculation. Why would I trust a deposed king? Because you hate them as much as I do. Maybe more. Darius leaned forward. They dishonorably discharged you for having a conscience. Destroyed your career because you wouldn't massacre civilians. You've been running this operation for 15 years, moving people the empire wants to disappear. He smiled. It wasn't kind. Don't pretend you're apolitical. You're as revolutionary as they come. You just haven't had the resources to do real damage. And you're offering those resources. In exchange for passage. Yes. Kess studied him for a long moment. Then she stood. "I have a ship leaving at dawn, cargo run to the outer territories. You can work passage as crew. I'm not exactly skilled labor. You were a soldier before you were a king. You'll manage." She moved to the door, paused. "Why Halvern? Someone I need to find. This someone worth starting a revolution over?" Darius's expression hardened. This revolution started the moment they decided people were worthless based on bloodlines. "I'm just finishing what they began." Kess studied him, then nodded. "Ship leaves in 2 hours. Don't be late." The voyage was brutal. Darius worked cargo loading, physical labor that made muscles he'd maintained through training scream in new ways. The crew treated him like any other sailor. No deference, no recognition. He was just another body hauling rope and crates. It was the most freedom he'd experienced in a decade. At night, when the crew slept and the ocean stretched endless in all directions, Darius planned. The empire was fracturing. The Northern Rebellion was real but disorganized. 3 noble houses working independently, each with their own agenda. They'd fail because they were trying to replace the system with themselves in charge. Same hierarchy, different names. That wasn't revolution. That was reshuffling. Real change required destroying the foundation and building something entirely new. A system based on merit instead of birth, on contribution instead of bloodline. It sounded naive even in his own head, but naive with conviction was more dangerous than cynicism with none. And Darius had conviction to spare. Halfway through the voyage, a storm hit, the kind that turned the ocean into a living beast trying to swallow everything above its surface. Darius worked alongside the crew, securing cargo, tying down anything that could become a projectile. His hands bled, his shoulders screamed, salt spray cut like knives, and he felt more alive than he had in years. Because this was real, immediate. No political calculation, just survival. The storm lasted 18 hours. When it finally broke, 3 crew members were injured and half the cargo was damaged. But the ship was still afloat. Kes found him on deck afterward. He was coiling rope with hands that had blistered and torn. You didn't have to work through that. Could have hidden below. What would that accomplish? She studied him. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A soft noble playing at revolution. Someone who'd break the first time things got hard. And now? Now I think you might actually be dangerous. She walked away, leaving Darius alone with the realization that he'd crossed some invisible threshold. He wasn't pretending anymore. Wasn't performing the role of revolutionary. He'd become it. Halvern was a port city at the empire's edge, where civilization frayed into wilderness and the law was more suggestion than mandate. The perfect place to hide people the capital wanted forgotten. Darius disembarked with the crew. Kes pulled him aside before he left. Your information better be worth passage. It is. He handed her a folded paper. Detailed notes on council supply routes, military weak points, corruption networks that could be exploited. Everything he'd memorized during 6 years of having access to every strategic document in the Empire. Kes read it. Her expression remained neutral, but her hands tightened on the paper. This is treason. This is warfare. And I just gave you the keys to winning it. Why? Because the Empire needs to fall. And I'd rather it fall to people who actually care about the population than nobles fighting over scraps of power. He turned to leave. Paused. When the revolution comes, and it will come, remember who armed you. Kes's voice stopped him. What do you want in return? Help me find someone. A woman exiled here 6 weeks ago. Elara Voss. And if I find her, tell her I'm coming. Then Darius walked into Halvern proper, leaving Kes staring after him with the expression of someone who just realized they'd aligned with something far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. Finding Elara took 3 days. Halvern wasn't large, but it was chaotic. Refugees, criminals, people escaping the Empire's interior for reasons ranging from practical to desperate. Darius asked questions, carefully. A woman alone. Recently arrived. Human features, dark hair, probably working menial labor because that's what exiles did when they had no resources. On the 3rd day, a dock worker pointed him toward a fish processing plant on the northern edge. She works there. Keeps to herself. You trouble? No. Just someone who owes her a conversation. The plant smelled like death and salt. Darius walked through processing lines where workers gutted fish with mechanical efficiency. Their hands were raw, their expressions dead. This was where the Empire sent people it wanted to forget. He found her at the end of the line, elbow deep in fish guts, hair tied back, face thinner than he remembered. She looked up when he approached. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then recognition hit. Her expression cycled through shock, anger, disbelief. She set down her knife, wiped her hands on a stained apron. What are you doing here? Her voice was flat, guarded. Darius gestured to the door. Can we talk? Somewhere private? I'm working. I'll pay for your shift. With what? You're a deposed king. You have nothing. I have information worth more than money. Elara stared at him. Then she called to the foreman, told him she was taking a break. He started to argue until Darius dropped a piece of intelligence about inspectors being paid off. The foreman's expression went pale. He nodded. They walked to a pier extending into the harbor, sat on weathered wood while the ocean breathed beneath them. Elara broke the silence first. You escaped? Yes. Why? Because I'm done being a prisoner. To the council. To the system, to expectations. He looked at her. And because I needed to find you, I told you to let me go. I tried. For about 48 hours. Then I realized you were right about everything except one thing. Which was, you said I didn't love you, that I was in love with the idea of defying the system. Alara's expression was carefully neutral. I stand by that. You were partially right. I did use you as a symbol, as a weapon against a system I hated. That was unfair. He paused. But you were wrong about the love part. Darius, don't. I need to say this. You were the first person in a decade who looked at me and saw a man instead of a crown. That wasn't convenient. It wasn't performance. It was real. Real enough to destroy your empire? Yes. The word was absolute. Alara looked away, stared at the horizon. They took everything from you. Because of me? No. Because I chose you over them. There's a difference. That doesn't make it less my fault. It makes it my responsibility. Not yours. Darius shifted closer. I'm building something, an actual revolution. Not nobles fighting over power, people fighting for a system that doesn't crush them based on birth. He met her eyes. I need your help. Alara's laugh was bitter. I'm a fish gutter in exile. What could I possibly offer a revolution? Perspective, credibility, proof that this isn't about me reclaiming power, but about changing the foundation. You want to use me again. As a symbol, the accusation landed. Darius didn't deny it. Yes, but this time you'd have agency, choice, a voice in how this unfolds. That's still manipulation. It's partnership. Partnership implies equality. You're a military strategist with 6 years of ruling experience. I'm nobody. You're someone who survived in conditions most people couldn't imagine, who stood in front of a hostile council and spoke truth, who had the courage to walk away when staying would have destroyed you. Darius's voice intensified. That's not nobody. That's exactly the kind of person a revolution needs. Alara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. What are you actually proposing? I'm proposing we finish what we started. Not the doomed romance, the actual change. We gather the exiled, the forgotten, the crushed. We build an army not of nobles, but of people who have nothing left to lose. And then we take back the empire. Not for me. For everyone they've spent centuries telling doesn't matter. That's insane. You're talking about civil war. I'm talking about revolution. There's a difference. People will die. People are already dying, slowly. Ground down by a system designed to extract everything from them while giving nothing back. Darius stood. The empire is fracturing. The council is scrambling. The Northern Rebellion is creating chaos. This is the moment, when the structure is weakest, when actual change is possible. He extended his hand. Help me, not because you owe me, but because you believe the system is broken and needs to burn. Alara stared at his hand. And if I say no, then I'll do it anyway, but I'd rather do it with you. Why? Because I trust you. Because you see clearly when I get lost in strategy. Because you're not afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. He paused. And because I need someone who remembers I'm human when the revolution starts treating me like a symbol again. Alara's expression cracked, showed something raw. You hurt me. By making me visible when I wanted to disappear. By imposing protection I never asked for. I know. And now you're asking me to do it again. To be visible, to be a target. Yes. But this time you'd be choosing it. The distinction sat heavy between them. Finally, Alara took his hand, stood, looked him in the eye. I'm not doing this for you, or for us. I'm doing it because you're right. The system is broken, and if there's a chance to actually change it instead of just swapping rulers, I want to be part of that. Good. But if you try to control me, to make decisions for me without consultation, I walk. Agreed. And if this becomes about you reclaiming the throne instead of actual change, I expose you. Also agreed. Alara's smile was sharp. Then let's burn an empire. The revolution started small. Darius and Alara moved through Halvern, identifying the exiled. People with skills. Anger. Nothing left to lose. There were more than Darius had expected. Former soldiers dishonorably discharged for various offenses. Craftsmen whose guilds had expelled them for political reasons. Scholars who'd published forbidden research. Merchants ruined by noble corruption. The forgotten population of an empire that measured worth in bloodlines. They met in a warehouse Kess provided. 30 people initially, then 50, then 100. Darius addressed them standing on a crate in the center of the space. You're here because the Empire decided you were worthless. Because you didn't fit the mold. Because you questioned or failed or simply existed wrong. His voice carried across the warehouse. I'm here because I tried to change the system from within, and it devoured me. Stripped me of power. Exiled the woman I love. Taught me that you can't reform something designed to resist change. He paused. So we're going to tear it down. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman stepped forward. Former military by her bearing. You're talking civil war. Thousands dead. For what? So you can reclaim your throne? No. So we can build a system where worth isn't determined by who your parents were, where talent and contribution matter more than bloodline. That's naive, someone called out. Probably. But naive with conviction changes the world more than cynicism with none. Darius scanned the crowd. I'm not asking you to follow me blindly. I'm asking you to decide if the empire that discarded you deserves to survive unchanged. If yes, leave. Go back to gutting fish or hauling cargo or whatever survival looks like. He stepped down from the crate, moved into the crowd. But if you believe that people matter, that the system is broken beyond repair, that your children deserve better than a world that decided their value before they were born, then stay. He stopped, turned, and let's become something they'll never forget. The warehouse was silent. Then one person stepped forward. Then another. Then 10, 20, 50. By the time the sun set, 93 people had committed to revolution. 93 against an empire. It should have been laughable. But Darius had learned that empires fell not from overwhelming force, but from cracks in the foundation. And he was about to become the earthquake that turned those cracks into canyons. But training took 2 months. Former soldiers drilled the civilians. Weapon training, tactics, urban warfare. Darius planned strategy with an efficiency that came from 6 years of military oversight. He knew the empire's defenses, its supply lines, where it was strong and where it was vulnerable. Alara organized logistics, supplies, communication networks, the unglamorous work that kept revolutions alive. They worked side by side, not as king and subject, not as lover and beloved, as partners in destruction. Late one night, after the recruits had slept and the warehouse was quiet, Alara found Darius studying maps. You should rest. Can't. The Northern Rebellion is fracturing. If we don't move soon, the moment passes. You're one man with 93 followers. Even with perfect strategy, those odds are catastrophic, which is why we're not fighting them directly. We're going to turn their own system against them. How? By exposing every corrupt practice, every abuse, every way the nobles have enriched themselves while the population starved. Alara sat down. That's information warfare, not physical. Information shapes perception. Perception shapes loyalty. We destroy their legitimacy before we ever draw a sword. He looked at her. The council thinks they won by deposing me, but they made a critical mistake. They assumed I'd disappear quietly. Instead, you became their worst nightmare. Exactly. Darius's smile was dangerous. A deposed king with intimate knowledge of every weakness in the empire, working with people who have nothing left to lose. He rolled up the maps. We strike in 3 days. Multiple cities simultaneously, not military targets, food distribution, water supplies, infrastructure the population needs. You're going to cripple civilians? No. We're going to commandeer those systems. Prove the empire can't protect its people, then offer an alternative. That's terrorism. That's revolution. Alara's expression was conflicted. This is going to get people killed. People are already dying, slowly. We're just accelerating the timeline. That's the same logic you condemned. I know. Darius's voice was quiet. I've become what I fought against. A man willing to sacrifice lives for political goals. The difference is those goals aren't about maintaining power. They're about redistributing it. That's a thin justification. It's all I have. He met her eyes. Tell me to stop. Right now. Tell me this is wrong and I'll listen. Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then she shook her head. I can't. Because you're right. The system won't change unless we break it, and breaking things requires force. She paused. But promise me something. When this is over, when the Empire has fallen, you'll step away. Let the people who suffered build what comes next. I promise. Darius caught her hand. This isn't about me reclaiming power. It's about ensuring power gets distributed instead of concentrated. I hope you mean that. So do I. Because 3 days later, when the simultaneous strikes hit 6 cities across the Empire, Darius discovered something terrifying about himself. He was good at this, at warfare, at calculated violence, at making choices that sacrificed individuals for strategic goals. The revolution ignited exactly as planned. Food distribution centers seized, water supplies secured, infrastructure commandeered, not destroyed, controlled. And in each location, Darius's people distributed supplies to the population, proved the revolution could provide what the Empire couldn't. The message was clear. Your rulers have failed you. We offer an alternative. Within a week, 3 more cities had uprisings. The council scrambled, sent military forces, but the revolutionary cells were decentralized. Attacking one did nothing to the others. And every violent response by the Empire's troops against civilians created more recruits. Because people remembered brutality and retaliated. 2 weeks after the initial strikes, Darius received word that the Northern Rebellion wanted to negotiate. They met in a neutral location, abandoned fortress between territories. The rebel leaders were exactly what Darius expected, nobles playing at revolution, wanting to replace the current council with themselves. Lord Farron spoke first, a man with calculating eyes and political ambition dripping from every word. You've created chaos. Impressive. But without military force, you can't hold territory. We're not trying to hold territory, we're trying to change the system. Idealistic nonsense. Power requires force. You don't have enough. But you do, Alara said. She'd insisted on attending. Partnership meant shared risk. Farron's gaze shifted to her, dismissed her instantly. Mistake. You have armies, she continued. Resources. Territory. But you don't have legitimacy. The population sees you as nobles fighting over scraps. And you offer legitimacy? We offer a vision beyond reshuffling power, a system where bloodlines don't determine worth. Farron laughed. You're naive if you think the population wants that. They want stability, order, someone to follow. Then let them choose, Darius said, between us and you. See who they align with. The challenge hung there. Farron's expression hardened. You're proposing an alliance? I'm proposing we combine forces. Your military strength with our popular support. Together we could actually topple the council. And after we let the people decide what comes next. Not us, them. Lord Marin, another rebel leader, spoke up. That's suicide. You're talking about giving up control. I'm talking about distributed power. Representative systems. Governance by consent instead of birthright. The rebel leaders exchanged glances. Finally, Farron stood. We'll consider your proposal, but understand this. If we align and you try to betray us, you'll discover that nobility knows how to eliminate threats. Noted. Darius's expression was calm. But understand this. If you try to betray the revolution's goals, you'll discover that people with nothing left to lose are far more dangerous than nobles protecting power. The meeting ended in tense détente. Walking back to their camp, Alara voiced what Darius was thinking. They're going to betray us. Probably. Then why negotiate? Because we need their resources long enough to take the capital. After that, we'll deal with them. You're planning to eliminate allies. I'm planning to prevent them from hijacking the revolution. That's exactly what they're planning to do to you. Then it becomes a question of who moves first. Alara stopped walking. This is what I was afraid of. You're becoming exactly what you fought against. No. I'm becoming what's necessary to win. At what cost? Whatever it takes. The words echoed the ones he'd spoken about protecting her. Alara's expression was devastated. You've lost yourself. I've found clarity. That's not clarity. That's obsession dressed in justification. Maybe. But we're too far in to turn back now. Darius kept walking, leaving Alara standing on the path, realizing with absolute horror that the man she'd helped unleash was more dangerous than the empire they were fighting, because empires were predictable, constrained by bureaucracy and tradition. But a revolutionary with nothing left to lose and strategic brilliance? That was chaos incarnate. And chaos, once released, didn't stop until everything burned, including the people who'd started the fire. Bob. The attack on the capital came 6 weeks later. Combined forces. Revolutionary cells within the city. Northern rebellion armies approaching from outside. Coordinated strikes designed to overwhelm the council's defenses. Darius led from the front. Not because he had to. Because he needed to. Needed to feel the violence he was orchestrating. To bleed alongside people he was asking to die. The battle was brutal. Street fighting. Building to building. Every intersection contested. Darius moved through it like he'd been born for this. Sword work, tactical commands, the cold efficiency of someone who'd studied warfare and was finally putting theory into practice. He killed 3 council guards in the first hour, not with hesitation, not with remorse, with the mechanical precision of someone who'd decided lives were acceptable costs for strategic goals. Alara fought beside him. She'd learned quickly during training. Survival instincts honed from years in dangerous neighborhoods translated well to combat. She watched him, saw the transformation. This wasn't the king who'd noticed her in a ballroom. This was something darker, forged in betrayal and rage and absolute conviction. By evening, they'd taken the outer districts. By midnight, they were at the palace gates. The council had fortified, expected this. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed Darius wanted the throne back. He didn't. He wanted the system destroyed, which meant he didn't need to take the palace. He needed to make it irrelevant. Signal the retreat, he told his commanders. What? We have them cornered, and they'll slaughter us trying to breach those walls. We're not here to take the palace. Then what are we doing? Proving it doesn't matter. Darius turned to the thousands of people who'd followed him into this madness. The empire was built on the idea that power flows from this building, from the council inside. From bloodlines and tradition and centuries of accumulated authority. His voice carried across the square. They're wrong. Power flows from you, from your willingness to participate in the system, from your labor that creates wealth they claim, from your compliance with rules designed to keep you powerless. He gestured at the palace. That building only has power if you give it power, so stop giving it. The crowd was silent, processing. Then one person started walking away from the palace, then another, then hundreds, not in fear, in dismissal. The most devastating weapon against authority is indifference, and Darius had just weaponized it. Inside the palace, the council watched through windows as their empire walked away. Ravencroft's face was pale. This isn't possible. Lady Vex's voice was quiet. He's not trying to replace the system. He's trying to make it obsolete. We have to stop him. How? We can't arrest the entire population. Then we kill him. Remove the head and the body dies. Lady Vex looked at him. You still don't understand. He's not the head. He's just the voice. You can kill him and the revolution continues. Because it was never about Darius. It was about millions of people realizing they didn't need permission to matter. Outside, Darius stood in the square watching the palace become irrelevant. Alara found him. You did it. You actually did it. Not yet. The council still has military force. They'll regroup, try to reclaim control through violence. What do? We wait. Let them make the first move. Let them prove to everyone watching that force is all they have left. And if they slaughter civilians, then we respond, decisively. His expression was stone. But this time, it won't be revolution against empire. It'll be people defending themselves against tyrants. The framing was everything. Alara stared at him. You've thought of everything. I've had 6 years in a deposition to plan this. Is there any humanity left in you, or have you become pure strategy? Darius finally looked at her. Really looked. I don't know anymore. His voice cracked. I've done things these past months that would have horrified the man who danced with you in that ballroom. Calculated deaths, manipulated people. Become exactly what I swore I'd never be. Then stop. Right now, before you lose yourself completely. I can't. We're too close. Too close to what? Victory? At what cost? Whatever it takes. The phrase had become his mantra, his justification, his damnation. Alara's eyes filled with tears. I've lost you. No. You've seen me clearly. Maybe for the first time. This isn't you. This is exactly me. Stripped of pretense, a man willing to burn the world to prove he's right. That's not strength. That's obsession. Call it what you want. But in 48 hours, when the council makes their move, you'll see why obsession wins. Darius turned away, leaving Alara standing in a square full of revolutionaries, realizing with absolute certainty that the man she'd loved was gone, replaced by something that wore his face but had sacrificed everything human in pursuit of a goal that might not even be achievable. And the worst part? She'd helped create this monster by asking him to be better, to choose compassion. He'd tried. And when the Empire crushed him for it, he'd learned the only lesson that mattered. Humanity was weakness, and weakness got you destroyed. So he'd become something else entirely, something the Empire couldn't crush, because you can't crush what has nothing left to lose and no limits left to respect. The Council's counterattack came at dawn, military forces flooding the streets, not to reclaim territory, to punish civilians for participating in revolution. It was a massacre. Darius watched from a rooftop as soldiers cut down unarmed people in the market district. His face showed nothing, but inside something final broke. This was the choice. The moment everything had been building toward. He could order his forces to defend civilians, escalate into full-scale warfare, thousands dead on both sides. Or he could let the massacre continue, let the council prove to everyone watching exactly how brutal they were, turn public opinion so decisively against them that the Empire's collapse became inevitable. The strategic choice was obvious. Let them kill. Use the deaths to fuel revolution. It was cold, calculated, monstrous. It was also the only way to guarantee systemic change instead of just replacing rulers. Alara appeared beside him, saw what he was seeing. Order the defense, now. No, people are dying. I know, then do something. I am. I'm letting the Empire destroy its own legitimacy. Her voice broke. These are civilians, unarmed, innocent. There are no innocents in revolution, only participants and casualties. The words were ice. Alara stared at him, horror and recognition warring in her expression. You're a monster. Yes. Darius finally looked at her. I've become exactly what was necessary to win, and I'll live with that. Will you? The question hung between them. In the streets below, the massacre continued, and on a rooftop above, two people who'd started this revolution stood at the precipice of a choice that would define everything that came after. Defend civilians and risk losing the strategic advantage, or let them die and guarantee the Empire's fall. Alara's hand moved toward her weapon. For a moment, Darius thought she might kill him, end this, stop the monster she'd helped create. But her hand stilled, and he saw the exact moment she made the same choice he had, the sacrifice of immediate morality for long-term change. It was the most devastating thing he'd ever witnessed, watching someone he loved become what they feared because of him. They stood together, silent. As the massacre ended and the Empire soldiers retreated, leaving streets painted red, and in the aftermath, when the surviving population emerged and saw what their rulers were willing to do, the revolution didn't need speeches or strategy. It needed only the memory of violence, and the promise that those who'd stood by and watched were coming for those who'd given the orders. Darius looked at Alara. Are you still with me? Her voice was dead, hollow, to the end. Even knowing what I've become? Especially knowing what you've become. She met his eyes. Because if we stop now, all those deaths mean nothing. We finish this. Burn the Empire to ash. Build something better from the ruins. She paused. And then we live with what we've done. The final battle was coming, not for power, for the very soul of what would rise from the ashes. And two people who'd lost themselves entirely stood ready to see it through. Whatever the cost, the city burned for 3 days. Not from revolution, from the council's final desperate act. They'd ordered their remaining military forces to torch the lower districts. If they couldn't rule the empire, they'd ensure no one else could either. Darius watched from the command center he'd established in what used to be a merchant guild hall. Maps covered every surface. Reports flooded in constantly. The revolution was winning, but the cost was catastrophic. Entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. Thousands dead. Tens of thousands displaced. And every death sat on his shoulders like stones. Alara entered carrying more casualty reports. She'd stopped trying to soften the numbers, just delivered them raw and walked away. They barely spoke anymore. The massacre 3 days prior had created a chasm between them that strategy couldn't bridge. She'd made the same choice he had, sacrificed immediate morality for long-term goals, and it had broken something fundamental in her. In both of them. She set the reports on the table without a word. Darius scanned them. His expression remained neutral, but his hands tightened on the paper. How many? This district alone? 400 confirmed, probably twice that when we finish counting. The council's doing this